The man abruptly extended his hand forward and shouted that this porter was expelled from the squad, called Wounds of Darkness. The people around looked with disdain at Sei, who was sitting on a chair, hunched over and holding his hands on his knees. Sei stared ahead and thought, I expected this. As a porter, he was always a burden to those on the front lines, under enemy fire. He remembered how he had studied hard, trying to keep up with the other adventurers, how he had sat at the same table with them. But he had never even achieved a copper rank. Images of gold coins flashed through his memory. This is a story about a boy who had no martial arts skills, but wanted to conquer the world. He was reborn as a porter with a special ability to store and chose a dream over strength. Now he lay surrounded by several girls. It was deep night outside. The dark sky was shining with the moon and a scattering of stars. Screams could be heard in the house. In the room on the bed, the boy was behind the girl who looked like a cat. The blonde-haired young man was hugging the cat-eared girl tightly. Her face was burning red, and their bodies were touching tightly. Then their lips met in a kiss. The boy and the girl continued to lie on the bed. She screamed with pleasure and meowed loudly. A white splash dissolved in the air. The girl with cat ears lay in the young man's arms. He placed the jug on the bedside table. She, laying her head on his stomach, confessed that she loved Sei. He looked at her intently. The cat-eared girl with the ponytail perched on Sei's chest. She whispered that she wanted to stay with him forever. In the dark room, where moonlight streamed through the large windows, the boy lay silent. Sei didn't answer, his head hanging down. His thoughts were swirling around the words of the stranger who had asked if he wanted to start a new life. The black-haired young man raised his head, shielding his face from the blinding light with his hand. Feathers were falling from the sky. He sat on the floor and stretched out his hand, which was touched by a woman's hand adorned with bracelets. A man with long golden hair stood before the boy. He spread his arms wide and smiled. The blond man offered the young man a choice between two paths. A table with various characteristics appeared before them. The black-haired boy confidently pointed to the profession of porter, refusing the title of hero. The next moment, the girl was holding a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes in her arms. The baby was sleeping peacefully. People stood around her, sincerely happy for the child and the mother. The events moved to the festive reception. A girl in a luxurious dress with a glass in her hands looked at the elegant guests. A flower decoration shone on her head. A huge chandelier illuminated the hall. A young blond man in the suit with a rose on his chest appeared. Many girls, their cheeks burning with embarrassment, gathered around him. The boy smiled broadly, returning their glances. The table with the characteristics appeared before everyone again. Someone pressed the button with the profession of porter. A strange glowing circle lit up above the blonde's head. The man in the business suit held a sword in his hands. His voice was menacing as he said that the boy should be buried secretly before anyone knew that such a lowly profession had been born into the ambitious family. The young man with the glowing circle above his head suddenly laughed. He declared that for the first time in his life, someone had voluntarily chosen the profession of a porter. The frightened boy looked at the blade of the sword, and the smile on the man's face gradually disappeared. The man with long hair covering his face grinned ominously and wished the boy luck in his transformation. Morning came. The sun rose high in the sky, its rays flooding the awakened city. The girl with the cat ears woke up, wrapped herself in a blanket and got out of bed. The empty room greeted her with silence. She began to look around confusedly, looking for someone. Her gaze fell on the table, where stood 2 glasses, a jug, and writing utensils. There was also a note lying there. Seeing it, the girl shuddered and quietly said someone's name. A blond young man named Sai threw on a jacket. His ear was pierced, and his locks fell over his face. He mentally apologized to Naiwan as he set off. The boy found himself in a room filled with various things. Weapons, bags, and clothes. He firmly decided to embark on a journey and become worthy of the one for whom he was ready to change. He moved his hand away, and all the possessions in the room vanished in an instant. The wind stirred the heavy curtains at the large window, and the sunlight flooded the space with golden light. The boy lifted his hood and pulled it over his head. A rope with a strange ornament hung around his neck. In his mind, he promised that when she grew up, they would go on a real journey together. The sun was blazing in the sky. The city, nestled among mountains and hills, lay below, and beyond it lay a dense, distant forest, looking gloomy and dangerous. Sei was walking along a narrow path through the thicket. He heard the clatter of hooves nearby. Armed riders in heavy armor were approaching. One of them called out to Sei, and he turned, hiding his face under his hood. 2 riders stopped nearby. Sei calmly said he might be of use to them. One of the men remarked that it was too reckless to walk around here without a weapon. Their surprised gazes stopped on him. He was silent and turned away. His face remained hidden by his hood and hair. One of the riders examined Sei's pendant and exclaimed that it was indeed a porter. The pendant had hands with a bag and strange inscriptions carved on it. Sei raised his head slightly. His face remained invisible. He confirmed that he was going from Magda to Amberius with a load, and confidently added that he was relying on his escape skills, so he didn't need an escort. One of the men in the helmet, with a feather in his hand, held the leash tightly. He declared that the chance of encountering a monster was small, since he and his partner patrolled this road and were usually the first to eliminate danger. But his tone suddenly changed to cold and condescending. He added that no one had ruled out the possibility of encountering robbers. Sei listened silently, his head lowered, without interrupting. The next moment, the helmeted rider reached for his weapon. Sei noticed the movement and at the same moment reached for his blade, tensely awaiting the outcome of events. However, the man only led the horse forward and told him to be more careful on this road. Sei briefly agreed and responded to the rider's words with a slight tilt of his head, following them with his gaze. He smiled and waved goodbye, but in a moment his face became serious and he lowered his hand. His hood covered his head, and strands of hair stuck out. The dark trees towered over the road, and the mountains rose behind them. One of the riders quietly asked his companion if they had done the right thing in letting this boy go, because he seemed too suspicious. The second tilted his head and suggested that he might be a scout for a gang hunting a trade convoy. The rider in front cautiously quickened his pace. The other just smiled and waved it off, saying that this guy was just a porter. It was the lowest profession possible, with meager characteristics and the worst rate of development. Sei nervously waved his hand at their words and adjusted his hood. The rider, continuing to mock, remarked that even if this boy were connected with the robbers, he would be of no use, since he belonged to a peaceful profession. The riders rode on horseback and said that the porters had the ability to store things that could be used for crimes or massacres. However, they were still forbidden from entering important institutions. And this one was heading in a completely different direction. Sei continued walking down the road through the gloomy forest. He took off his hood and looked around, holding something in his hands. Strangers' words echoed in his head about how porters were among the weakest in the world. Soon he was on a hill overlooking a small town. The wind blew his cloak and scarf. The town lay in the middle of a low forest and was surrounded by high mountains. The sun's rays fell on the buildings of the city, which differed from each other in shape and appearance. The streets were buzzing with crowds. There were so many people that the noise did not subside for a moment. A girl stood by a brick wall. A beautiful stone in her jewelry shone on her chest. Nearby, men's mockery and vulgar words could be heard, as several strangers began to tease her. The short girl found herself surrounded by several grim-faced men. Her face was burning with fear and shame. Her blonde hair was sticking out from under her hood, and she clasped her hands together across her chest as if seeking protection. The men looked at her with predatory smiles. They pretended to be kind, saying they could take her to a wonderful place. They persuaded her to go with them, promising to tell her everything about this city. Sei was walking down one of the streets, mingling with the crowd. Suddenly, he noticed several men pushing a short girl against a wall, blocking her path. He stopped in the middle of the street, not far from where the girl was pinned down by a group of men against a brick wall. The girl raised her hands to her face, wanting to say something, but she didn't dare. The men insisted that she go with them. Sei stood aside and watched silently. She folded her hands together, her cheeks burning red. She said excitedly that the men's proposal sounded very tempting. It was her first time in this city, and she was really interested in hearing about it. Hearing these words, Sei's face changed. His gaze narrowed, and from under his hood he cast a sharp, reproachful glance at the girl and the men. The hood was lined with soft fur inside. The men's faces turned red, their smiles even more disgusting. They took the girl by the hand and led her away, continuing to explain something to her in a hurry. Sei put his hands in his pockets and silently watched them go. He was about to leave, but suddenly he stopped. He thought aloud that the girl was too carefree. She looked innocent and naive. Maybe she was the daughter of some nobleman. Various people passed by, not paying attention. Sei smiled, raised his head, and closed his eyes. He muttered that these men were trying too foolishly to court her. Would anyone really believe such a cheap lie? It was none of his business. But suddenly, an image of another girl, covered in blood, lying on the ground and gently touching his face, flashed through his mind. This memory changed Sei's expression dramatically. The smile disappeared. His face became gloomy. He continued to stand in the middle of the stone street, where the cobblestones lay beneath his feet. People hurried past, not noticing him. One of the houses had a window that looked straight out onto the roof. It was opposite this house that Sei now stood, pausing thoughtfully. Meanwhile, the girl and the men were led aside to an abandoned house. Its windows were broken. The walls were covered in cracks. Bent trees grew nearby. She entered first, holding tightly to the strap of her small bag. She said excitedly that she was curious about what could be in this house. The men, entering after her, promised that a surprise awaited her, and that now she would tell them everything. Sinister smiles appeared on the men's faces. They closed the door tightly with a thick board, then slowly moved towards the girl, who stood with her back to them. Only one dim light was burning in the dark room. They grabbed the girl and lifted her horizontally, revealing her underwear. One of them began to unbutton her pants, cynically declaring that her skin was too attractive and it was time to serve him. But in an instant, the man's face contorted in pain, his eyes rolled, and saliva spurted from his mouth. The other bandits froze in amazement, not understanding what had happened to him. Behind him stood a boy. Sei hit the man right between the legs. The man bent over and let the girl out of his arms. The others stared in amazement at Sei's unexpected appearance, even feeling fear. Sei stood behind him, his hands in his pockets, his face impassive. The man he had struck writhed on the floor, while the others stared at the newcomer with anger and incomprehension. The blond man screamed, demanding an explanation, but the next moment Sei grabbed him by the clothes. Beads of sweat appeared on the frightened man's face. He had not expected such strength and impudence. With a sharp movement, Sei threw him to the ground. His body hit the floor with a dull thud, and the man's face contorted in sharp pain. Sei put his arm around his neck and pointed the knife. He said coldly that the others had to move away, otherwise the blonde would not be well. The victim looked at the blade with horror. A bald, shirtless man stepped forward with a smile. His arms raised, he hid a weapon behind his back and a bag hung at his side. He mockingly stated that Sei was acting like a knight rescuing a princess, and it looked impressive. At the same time, he made it clear that he was the real leader here. The bald man smiled even wider and said that the boy should calm down. After all, it was more important to save all his people or someone random found on the street. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man and the beast man were holding the girl, who was already lying on the floor. The old cracked ceiling was visible from above. The bald man muttered with feigned regret that he was sorry that his people had touched Seiya's girlfriend. He raised his hands above his head, still smiling, and apologized for his young and hot subordinates, calling them too inexperienced. His bag was dangling over his shoulder. Sei, holding the knife to the blonde's throat, calmly declared that they had to let the girl go. Only then would he release the hostage. Behind him, the silhouettes of the bandits darkened. The bald man continued to smile and pretend to agree. But suddenly his face darkened, and he mockingly said that his subordinate was so scared that he was just going to relieve himself right now, and that it was not appropriate to show others. Sei looked at him with a serious look. The blonde he was holding had tears in his eyes. He looked away, not understanding what was happening. The next moment, the bald man was behind Sei. Armed, he swung his weapon, and then disappeared, appearing next to the blonde. His devastating blow blew the blonde to pieces, blood and flesh flying around the room. The bandits standing to the side shuddered. One of them smiled evilly, as the blonde's entrails even flew across the walls. There was a bloody stain on the floor, and a weapon that had fallen from his hands. The bald man grinned predatorily and said that before saving someone, one should carefully assess the strength of the enemy. Sei only briefly replied that he agreed. The bald man glanced in his direction, but at the same moment he heard a voice behind him. Sei had already moved away from the bandits, holding the girl in his arms and hiding his face under his hood. The bald man turned away and mockingly remarked that the boy's feet were lightning fast. The other bandits were shocked by his reaction. Sei stood up, supporting the girl's back, and quietly asked if she could stand. She nodded. The bald man with the scar on his face narrowed his eyes and looked at Sei suspiciously, hinting that he was probably the girl's real bodyguard. Sei, hiding his face under his locks of hair, replied that it didn't matter right now. The girl, trembling, folded her arms and stood behind Sei. He stepped forward and assumed a fighting stance, declaring that although he was a porter, he was actually an adventurer. The dark-haired man was hit in the face by the girl's heel and screamed in pain. The other bandits grabbed her legs, mocking her that although she was strong, her level was too low, as she had only recently become an adult. One of the bandits grabbed the girl, bending down to face her. He said that they knew how to do such things. The others laughed, supporting his insulting words. Several bandits looked at Sei in surprise, not believing that he was really just a porter. After all, it was considered the weakest profession. However, he stood calmly, holding his cloak, and the girl hid behind him. One of them laughed, and soon everyone began to mock him, saying that this boy was too stupid and did not know his place. They laughed at his actions, but he remained silent, listening attentively. His face remained cold and focused. Sei activated his ability to analyze. There were several wooden floors above the ceiling. One of the bandits said that they could have fun with the girl later. They had to deal with him first. He assessed each of them. 2 of the 4 were armed. One wore a cloak and was a 17th level assassin. The second was a 15th level swordsman. The third was a 10th level boxer, and the fourth was a 20th level warrior. One of them licked his blade and hissed ominously that this wretch who didn't know his place would be a test for his twin sword. He threatened that it would regret ever meeting them. Sei just closed his eyes and sighed heavily. He calmly replied that there was nothing more important in this world than a profession. Strong professions make people almost invincible, while weak ones are doomed to become victims. To go up against them with only the profession of a porter is a challenge to yourself. The girl stared in front of her, arms folded across her chest, stunned. The bandits glared at her, armed themselves, and began to slowly extend their arms, preparing for battle. Sei put one hand on his belt and scratched the back of his head with the other. He smiled slightly and said that, despite everything, these people would lose to him, the weakest of all losers. He touched his face with his fingers, smiled sinisterly, and added that they didn't think that if they lost to him, they would fall even lower than Sei himself. His jacket was unbuttoned, fur sticking out from under the hood. The blonde shouted and swung at Sei, but Sei held out his nunchakus, and the bandit's blade stuck right into them. Sei kicked sharply, knocking the enemy aside, then took up a fighting stance. The blonde looked at his hand in horror. The sword had disappeared. He pointed at Sei, trembling, and shouted, "Where did his weapon go?" The one-eyed beast rushed forward, shouting that he was using the storage skill. The one-eyed man shouted for everyone to attack together. All the bandits rushed at Sei, brandishing their weapons, their faces filled with rage. One tried to grab him, but Sei dodged and counterattacked the others one by one. The one-eyed man was hit in the face, flying away with a scream. The one-eyed beast, lying horizontally, grimaced fiercely at Sei, who had just struck it. Its gaze burned with rage and resentment. The next moment, the bandit in the upside-down helmet opened his mouth in surprise. Something was flying towards him. Sei's blow sent his helmet flying to the side. The bandit ran around the room, shouting that he couldn't see anything. He tried to get into a fighting stance, but an armed opponent was already waiting behind him. The hooded bandit stuck out his tongue and grinned. He clutched a knife in his hands, about to stab Sei from behind. But Sei noticed the threat, and an iron chain appeared in his hands. The hooded bandit lunged forward, but Sei dodged. The enemy was stunned. He didn't even have time to realize how he had slipped away. A long iron chain began to coil around them. Sei jerked the chain sharply, trapping the hooded attacker. Sliding across the floor, he jerked, and the bandit found himself behind him, while another enemy tried to attack from the front, extending his broken arm. Sei grabbed the dark-haired bandit's head and slammed it to the floor, then jumped aside. The chain appeared in his hands again, and the bandits began to stand up, screaming. As they stood up, a giant shadow loomed over them. Everyone shuddered and looked up. Above them towered a stone statue, bound in iron chains. One of the hooded bandits found his hand tightly gripped by a chain. Beads of sweat stood out on his forehead as he stared at his own limb in bewilderment. The chain statue fell to the floor with a thud, dragging one of the hooded bandits with it. He fell with it, struggling to get his footing. Suddenly, a bald man appeared behind Sei and swung his weapon. Sei sensed danger, and at the last moment, he raised his wooden shield. The weapon crashed into him with terrifying force. The bald man pressed, gripping his weapon, and Seiya was thrown back by the impact. The shield shattered into pieces, and his body crashed into the stone statue. An explosion of dust filled the room. Twisted in midair, he closed one eye and folded his arms. A huge mattress suddenly appeared in front of the wall. Instead of a stone, he hit it, saved by his own magic. Sei fell to the floor and started to rise. The bald one came at him with a heavy hammer, mockingly saying that no one survives using such skills because physical strength decides everything. Stopping, he smiled and said that the room looked cleaner than usual. The reason was that Sei had used the storage skill before the battle. Clouds of dust were rising behind him. Sei was kneeling, wiping his face with his hand, while the other was leaning on the floor. Behind him was still the mattress. The bald man said with a smile that porters of this caliber were rare, but this one was still too weak. The bald man smiled even more wickedly. The veins on his body bulged, and a table with the profession appeared next to it. A warrior of the 30th level. He declared that now he would show the real difference between them. At that moment, Sei stretched out his hand, and a large stone brick appeared in front of him. The head of the bald man, who was advancing, was a few meters away from Sei. Sei jerked to the side. The next blow shattered the stone brick into pieces. The fragments flew into the air, and the bald man moved forward, not taking his eyes off the boy. Sei calmly watched his actions. The cloud of dust from the broken bricks dispersed, and suddenly several bags marked flour appeared in front of the bald man. The bald man swung and smashed the bags with a heavy hammer. A cloud of flour dust rose into the air, enveloping the room. Gritting his teeth, he looked around and angrily exclaimed that such childish tricks wouldn't work. Or was Sei trying to escape? But the next moment, several more bags of flour flew straight at him. The bald man continued to swing the hammer and smash the flour sacks, raising clouds of dust. The latter calmly replied that he had done all this on purpose to drive him here. The bald man became even more furious. Veins stood out on his face, and cracks appeared from the impact on the wall. He coldly said that this was a bandit's den, a former warehouse built of fireproof materials. The warehouse windows were boarded up. Sei added that he had improved the room a bit, limiting air circulation and setting up a trap. He stood by one of those boards, raised his hand, which was burning with fire, and directed the flame into a small opening. The room was covered with flour dust. Sei said coldly that it would be interesting to see what would happen if fire were used here. The bald man shouted that this was nonsense. He hid behind a huge statue that looked like a chicken. Meanwhile, he kept one hand in his pocket and the other out to the side. A powerful explosion rang out from behind. Flames tore through the space, and Sei, without looking back, slowly walked forward, saying that this man would die, without ever understanding his words. He approached the girl, who was sitting on the floor, her eyes wide open in surprise. Thick smoke was already beginning to fill the room. Sei reached out to the girl and asked if she was okay. She said yes and took his hand. He activated his ability, and a table with her characteristics appeared next to her. She was a nun. Sei was surprised to see the name. Runa Amelia Taltwalt. He pulled up his hood and sternly warned the girl not to trust strangers. He put one hand in his pocket, waved goodbye with the other, and started to walk away. The girl clutched her suitcase and shouted for him to wait for her. The room was getting more and more smoky. Sei went to the door, opened it, and said that there were enough curious onlookers, so she should get out quickly. People appeared on the street. The door creaked open and Sei disappeared into the darkness. The girl stood there, her hand raised in shock, her expression confused. Night fell. Lights were lit in the windows of a multi-story building. Inside, a girl in a translucent dress with a headdress was dancing. Sei and the other men were sitting at wooden tables with mugs and plates. The girl in the transparent dress turned her back to Sei. He involuntarily glanced at her slender figure, holding a wooden mug of drink in his hands, thinking about something. He placed the mug of foamy drink on the table and thought the rescued girl had a surname, so she came from an aristocratic family. In his imagination, Runa smiled and touched his hand. Sei decided that she was too trusting, probably raised with the love and care of her parents. He picked up his mug again and took a sip. He figured that until he knew what kind of environment she was in, it would be best to stay away from her. Holding the mug to his face, he listened out of the corner of his ear as Runa and the mustachioed man talked. The girl explained that she was on a monastic mission and could treat any wounds for free. Sei stood up and walked over to her. He asked if she was okay. Runa turned around, her cheeks burning, and she said that this was indeed the boy who had saved her. The mustachioed man gave her a sly look and said she just wanted a free number. In his grandfather's time, monastic missions had been common, but now they were rare. The girl confirmed his words. He added that he didn't want to quarrel with the church, so he could offer the girl a place to stay for the night in a room for 6. Runa thanked him, and the man introduced himself as the owner of the establishment. A picture flashed before Sei's eyes. Runa in her nightgown, disheveled, and surrounded by several men touching her body. He placed a coin with a picture of a woman on the bar counter, and firmly said that he would pay for a private room for her. Runa was surprised, and the owner of the establishment thanked Sei. As he walked away from the bar, Sei heard Runa thank him again. He looked back and said, "You're welcome." Turning away, he quietly added that the priest had once saved his life, and now he was simply paying off a small debt. With one hand in his pocket, he stood up with the other to bid farewell to his friend. Runa stopped him, calling out excitedly. She blushed and introduced herself. Runa Amelia Taltwalt, nun of the Holy Order. She wanted to thank him for saving her. Sei looked at her and also gave his name. Then he turned and left. Runa bowed, and he returned to his seat and continued drinking from his mug. The girl remained at the counter next to the mustachioed man. He was wiping the mug with a towel and suddenly shouted that the girl was just trying to eat for nothing. Maybe it was time for her to stop begging? Runa calmly repeated that she was on a monastery mission. Two strange men entered the establishment. Their faces were red and their mouths were dripping with saliva as soon as they saw Runa. The men approached Runa and began to brazenly say that she could treat them, and in return they would feed her and help her. She gratefully thanked them for their generosity. Sei overheard this conversation. He slammed his mug on the table and stood up abruptly. In a moment he was standing at the bar, where Runa was sitting among the unfamiliar men. She looked at his back in surprise. Sei turned to her with a slight smile, but his eyes were filled with hidden anger. He asked if Runa would like to have dinner with him. He held a mug in his hand, his fur hood draped over his shoulders. Runa folded her arms, her face flushed. She exclaimed excitedly that she would be happy to join him. The girl sat down on a soft chair near the bar. Meanwhile, the girl in the transparent dress continued to dance, smiling sweetly at the guests, jewelry shining on her head and hands. There were a lot of people in the hall. The tables were overflowing with food and snacks. Runa asked curiously if Sei was currently performing some task. He calmly held the mug in his hands and replied that he was not on a mission right now, but was heading to the Lotus in Linkila. They were sitting near the bar. Runa happily said that she also needed to go to the Lotus. Sei replied briefly that he understood. Mustachioed men were sitting nearby, eating their meals. She explained with a smile that she was on a monastery mission and wanted to gather a group to go through the Lotus labyrinth. Perhaps their paths had crossed. Sei narrowed his eyes and agreed. He raised his mug and said that a porter would be needed in that city. Runa held the utensils, her mouth full of food, but she supported his words. There were crumbs on her reddened face. She looked down at the plate of vegetables and meat and, embarrassed, apologized. Runa clenched her fists and said that this must be a sign from above. She had been given the chance to travel with a companion. Sei looked at her intently, holding the mug. She raised her hands and looked him in the eye confidently, saying that if he didn't mind, they could go together. Sei was surprised, feeling her persistent gaze. He was silently meditating, turning the mug in his hands. His hair was a little disheveled, and his thoughts were confused. Finally, he raised his mug and, closing his eyes, said that if Runa could endure the hardships, he would accept her offer. The girl beamed with a happy smile. Sei raised a finger at Runa and added that he was a commoner and she could not address him formally. She replied, embarrassed, that she owed him a lot and would have to rely on him from now on. His face changed. He frowned slightly and admitted that she was indeed serious. Hearing this, Runa closed her eyes and smiled softly. Sei thought for a moment and returned her smile. They sat at the bar, the girl listening intently to his every word. Sei raised his hand and said something to her, continuing to hold her gaze. Runa touched his shoulder, and he supported his chin with one hand, pointed to the side with the other, and then looked at her with a slight smile. She covered her mouth with her hand and laughed. She picked up her suitcase and walked to the exit. A lamp with a candle hung by the door. Sei waved goodbye to her, and the girl smiled warmly in return. The night sky spread out over the city, decorated with the moon and stars. The wooden door in the room was closed. A wooden basin stood on the table, and a clean towel lay next to it. Drops of water ran down Sei's face. He sighed heavily. Shirtless, wearing only his pants, he raised his hand and balls of fire and water appeared in it. The heated water slowly poured into a wooden basin. He wiped his body with a wet cloth, thinking that even while bathing he was practicing magic and perfecting his storage skill. A fire burned in his hand, and a drop of warm water rose above him. He squeezed the rag, squeezing out the water after washing. Sei stood at a table with a wooden basin, and behind him was a neatly made bed. He snapped his fingers and his clothes instantly disappeared. Looking at the water, he noted that even during his vacation he continued to train. It was the only way to survive in a weak profession. But he sighed heavily and said that he couldn't do it anymore. He clasped his hands together and mentally admitted that he was feeling very aroused. He began to use the self-healing skill to calm himself down. His breathing became deep. In his mind, he saw the curves of Runa's body and her gentle smile. He thought that for a man, life without a woman was a real hell. There was a knock on his room door. Sei opened his eyes and looked at them. Completely naked, he walked over and grabbed the handle, preparing to open it. A dancer from the establishment where Sei had dinner with Runa stood in the doorway. She smiled and introduced herself as Manaya, saying that she worked as a dancer. The girl came over and hugged Sei, joking that it was boring to sleep alone in such a luxurious room. She added that she had seen him looking at her that evening in the hall. Leaning against him, she whispered that a night together could be truly special. Her gaze fell on the porter's pendant hanging around his neck, and surprise appeared in her eyes. She hugged his hand and said that he was indeed a porter. although she thought he was a hero for paying for that nun's room. She even added that she would like to have a child with him. Sei looked wearily at the girl who had begun to take off her clothes. She smiled and said that the profession was hereditary, and she wouldn't want such a future for her children. His gaze remained wary. After a while she was lying on the bed, her arms outstretched, moaning with pleasure. He was touching her body, and she was screaming that this was the first time in her life she had ever felt this way. Sei and the girl were on the bed. She was kneeling and he was behind her, holding her hips. She stuck out her tongue and cried out in pleasure. A white splash flew through the air. He picked her up. Another splash ripped through the air, then let her go. The girl fell onto the bed and screamed that she was going crazy and couldn't take it anymore. Sei closed his eyes, put his hands behind his head, and smiled, saying that she was giving up so quickly. He realized that he had found her weakness and decided to push even harder. His hands were on her hips again. She stuck out her tongue and begged him to stop, but he replied that it was too early to rest. He picked her up and hugged her again, touching every part of her body. She screamed with pleasure, and he, standing behind her, just smiled. The night turned into morning. The sun gradually rose and illuminated the roofs of the city houses. The bed was filled with a strange liquid. Sei stood naked by the large window, the wind blowing his hair. The morning was quiet, but he exclaimed loudly that this dawn was truly wonderful. The girl lay on the bed with her mouth open, and he called her to look at the beauty outside the window. Standing by the open window, he, completely naked, smiled and said that he would like to repeat the events of the night one more time before moving on. There was not a single cloud in the sky. The magnificent crowns of trees rose all around, and the city was hidden among the hills. Runa raised her fist, her face flushed and her eyes glowing with enthusiasm. Behind her sat Sei, smiling as he looked at her. The wheels of the cart creaked, and the travelers moved forward. In the cart were Sei and Runa with several people. One was sleeping, another was reading. The rest were discussing how to get to the place faster. The cart moved along a narrow path in the middle of the field. A dense spruce forest darkened ahead, and high mountains rose behind it. Runa, leaning her hands on the edge of the cart, looked at Sei with a smile and said that she was grateful to him, because he had paid for the trip. Sei looked at her suspiciously and said that she must have a plan to travel for free. He was surprised that nothing had happened to her yet. She admitted that he was right. His expression changed as he looked from the girl to the window. There he saw a picture that filled him with wonder and admiration. Before him opened a panorama of the city, surrounded by high stone walls, which in turn were surrounded by a dark and dense forest. Runa held onto the edge of the cart and looked at Sei, who was starting to take his hood off his head. He lowered it and smiled casually. Runa looked at him in surprise, her face turning an even brighter red. They arrived at a large wooden house, with many people gathered outside and other carts parked. Runa noticed that Sei was no longer hiding his face. He replied that he did not want to be recognized. She asked in surprise if he had hurt anyone. Sei put his hands in his jacket pockets and said he wanted to ask her a few questions. He looked at her and calmly said that she should tell him about her monastic mission, which she constantly talks about. Runa, with a smile, began to explain that this is the path for those whom God has bestowed with the profession of a monk. They travel the world, heal the sick, and at the same time fight monsters. She folded her arms and looked up, imagining a girl in nun's robes with a weapon in her hands. Runa said that her goal was to level up and become a priestess instead of a monk. They sat on the veranda of a wooden house at a table with a tray of food. Runa said with a smile that under God's protection, she and her companions were seeking adventure while helping each other. Runa folded her hands and closed her eyes. She said that everything was happening as if in a story about a holy woman who went on a monastic mission. Sei, taking a bite of his sandwich, asked her to tell him more. Runa continued with a smile, explaining that it was a biography that she had reread many times. She unfolded a map with fields, forests, lakes, and mountains, and added that she had traveled the world a lot, healing those in need, fighting monsters, and moving on again. He and Sei stood on the porch, looking out at the beautiful view. They talked about how everyone raises the bar in their own way. Mountains and lush treetops stretched out before them. Runa said her family was not wealthy, so they couldn't afford to hire security when they moved. She looked ahead and said that, like the saint in the book, she wanted to gather a group and go underground, because she too must have a goal in life. Sei leaned on the railing and stared at Runa, then turned away and said that he was just a porter. And then he laughed and added that he didn't want to live within limits. Heroes and warriors are strong, but their lives are ruined by expectations and the burden of responsibility. Runa looked at him in surprise. They looked at the mountains. Sei stretched out his hand and said that the world was too big to live in chains. He wanted to be strong, but not necessarily the strongest. Raising his hand up and clenching his fist, he smiled and said that he wanted to live his life the way he wanted and travel the world. They walked through the city streets, full of people. Runa walked in front, smiling, and Sei a little behind, also smiling faintly. Soon they came to a pond. Runa took off her shoes and waded into the water up to her ankles. Fish swam near her feet, and she watched them with delight. Sei walked over to her and also stood in the water. Runa slipped and almost fell. The people on the shore were already looking at her. He managed to grab her by the arms and lift her up. She leaned against him and smiled guiltily. Runa was all wet, her breasts pressed against Sei's body. He shuddered and began to look at her with a gloomy expression. The sun was setting behind the mountains. The sky was slowly darkening, and birds were flying over the roofs of the houses. Saying goodbye to Runa, Sei felt a strange unease. His body trembled. His face was covered in sweat. Walking down the street, he saw female silhouettes in a dark alley. He looked at the girls in revealing clothes, their faces flushed. One of them began to take off her clothes. His gaze became wary and thoughtful. 3 naked girls lay on the bed, their faces burning, their tongues hanging out. One was on her knees, and the man behind her was using her. She looked at him with a strange look, and he just smiled sinisterly. Morning came. The sun rose high, illuminating the roofs of houses and the green crowns of trees. Runa went outside. Her cheeks were burning. She looked away and smiled broadly. Sei came up and greeted her. They got into the cart and set off along the wide road. A new village was already visible on the horizon, with high mountains rising beyond. They entered a city where the houses were close together. People filled the narrow, winding streets. The city was built on hills, so there were stairs everywhere. On one of the streets, there were shops selling household goods. Strangely dressed people with unusual facial features walked by. Sei held a sandwich in his hands, took a bite, and said that they would soon be in Lotus City. Runa reached out to take a piece. She asked if he had been to Lotus before. Sei closed his eyes and said that he hadn't, but he could feel it in the atmosphere. He remembered various people in strange clothes and armor that seemed formidable. Sei said that they looked like adventurers, but they were afraid of each other. Holding the sandwich in one hand and keeping the other in his pocket, he added that they were 100% adventurers who wanted to raise their rank to bronze. Runa listened to his words shyly. They approached the cart. Runa said he was extremely observant. Sei replied that his observation skills were the only guarantee of survival. As he climbed into the cart, he added that truly strong adventurers were distinguished by their aura. He could feel it right away. He settled comfortably in the carriage, closed his eyes, and noticed that even a commoner could feel it. Opening his eyes slightly, he looked away and was surprised to see a girl in an unusual outfit next to him. 2 more adventurous girls were sitting in the carriage. A blonde in a short suit with a cloak over her shoulders, and a brunette who covered one eye with her hand. Sei crossed his legs, folded his arms over his chest, and noted that everything around him seemed to be fine. Runamelia asked if those people could be stronger than the adventurers. The blonde in the short dress gracefully crossed her legs, long stockings visible from under the suit. The 3rd girl sat in the carriage with them. She had a bow from her blouse on her chest and a ribbon tied around her waist. Sei pretended not to hear the question, looked at the girls, blushed, and said that they were dressed quite impressively. Runamelia replied that equipment also enhances strength. The carriage swayed on the uneven road. Sei remarked that he should look more closely. Runamelia agreed and said that she still had a lot to learn from him. Finally, they reached a tall wooden building with flags and signs depicting dishes and food. Fluffy clouds floated above the roof. On the table stood a wooden mug with a foamy drink and a slice of lemon, and next to it were several plates. The dark-haired girl exclaimed that everything here was surprisingly delicious. She set down her mug, raised her finger, and said she wanted a refill. The waitress stood nearby, and Sei thought for a moment. Then he raised his finger and said that a true adventurer must be able to sense approaching danger. Sei and Runamelia were sitting at the table. He raised his hand and reminded her that she had left her things in the carriage. The girl looked closely and confirmed. She remembered that the coachman was a nice man and had promised to take care of her things himself. But Sei's expression changed, and he replied that this was exactly what he wanted to warn her about. At the next table sat stern men. Sei said that Runamelia's path would be filled with many confident adventurers, some of whom would be wicked. In another corner sat more gloomy warriors in armor, a suitcase lying next to them. Sei added that one should not trust the coachman so easily. One should keep one's things with oneself. He pushed back his chair and spread his arms, explaining that he was a porter. If he stole things, he wouldn't be able to use them. He was an exception. At another table, a man in a long cloak held a suitcase by his side. Sei noted that those who put things near themselves were always on guard. The man had a hunting knife on his belt visible from under his cloak. Sei said that if anyone touched his property, he would immediately pull out his weapon. He rested his chin on his hand and warned Runamelia. If she relaxed, things would disappear. In this world, money was too important. They would do anything for it. Sei looked at the girl suspiciously. She put her hand to her face and noticed that he was saying really scary things. He leaned back in his chair and replied that one shouldn't trust strangers so quickly. Then Sei sat up straighter, smiled a little, and said he could give one of the reasons why he was hiding his face. Runamelia stared at him intently. Sei put his hands on his head, made a terrible face, and, approaching, shouted that he might be a robber or even a worse monster. Runamelia covered her lips with her hand and laughed, then suddenly let out a gasp. Sei flinched at the reaction and dropped his hands in confusion. The girl squinted and, smiling, said that it really was a monster, because she was so scared that she didn't know what to do next. Sei slowly lowered his hands, looked in surprise, and thought that Runamelia was hopeless. She was truly a nobleman's daughter who knew nothing about people's evil intentions. He turned away, leaned against the table, and thought that this innocence would sooner or later lead her to trouble. If he wanted her to grow up, he had to experience real fear. Sei sighed, thinking that he just needed an opportunity. And then they saw a bandit approach the cart, distract the coachman, grab his weapon, and hit him, knocking him to the ground. The robber grabs the suitcase and runs away with a predatory smile. The coachman lies on the stones, gets up, and starts shouting that he is a thief. Sei placed his hand on the back of the wooden chair and watched in amazement as Runamelia sat next to him, her mouth agape, her eyes wide open, and dropped her sandwich in shock. The man with a bandage on his head and eyes grinned ominously and rushed to run away, grabbing several suitcases that were lying in Sei and Runamelia's cart. The coachman with a bruise on his head looked after the thief and shouted, pointing his finger forward, that he had taken Runamelia's suitcase. She, trembling all over, raised the alarm with a cry, and drops of sweat appeared on her face. The thief ran as fast as he could, clutching the suitcase with two clasps tightly in his hand. Runamelia screamed frantically that these were indeed her things. Sei got up from the table and looked out the window, saying that it was probably too late to chase. But at that moment, a loud crash was heard from outside. Sei looked at the crying Runamelia and thought that he could have quickly caught up with the thief, but this situation was a great opportunity to teach her common sense, because it was obvious that there was something extremely important to her in that suitcase. Runamelia covered her face with her hands, tears rolling down her fingers. Sei reflected that by trusting the coachman, she had left something valuable in the cart, and now she must learn an important lesson. Runamelia's entire face was wet with tears. She sobbed, putting her hands to her face, and looked at Sei with despair and pleading. Sei looked at her, then thought for a moment and said that Runamelia should be waiting for him here. He opened the window and jumped out, promising to be back in a moment. The wind blew his hair and cloak as he disappeared outside. Meanwhile, the thief was speeding down a narrow alley, and Sei, moving along a parallel street with an impassive face, almost caught up with him. In the air, Sei noticed the thief with a bandage on his face, and thought that escaping through a narrow alley gave him an advantage, and if he only wasted a little time, he would slip away. But in a moment, a girl appeared in the thief's path. Screaming angrily, he demanded that she get out of the way. The girl turned to him. Watching from the side, Sei saw her place the grocery bag on the crate and crouch down, picking up a few small stones. Putting her foot down, the girl began to throw pebbles, and Sei, activating his ability to see characteristics, was stunned by what he learned. The wind blew her hair and her gaze was serious. Sei read her name, Zofi, 16 years old, profession, assassin, level 12. Zofi swung her weapon and threw a pebble at the thief. The projectile hit him squarely in the leg. The thief hopped on one leg, yelping loudly in pain, but did not let go of his prey. He stopped near a wooden box with buckets. Zofi had one more pebble left in her hand, and she threw it at the robber a second time. The stone hit the thief in the face with incredible speed. A tooth flew out of his mouth, and he himself, along with the loot, crashed into the box, scattering the buckets. The bandit lay there for a few seconds, kicking up clouds of dust, then jumped up abruptly and ran away again, shouting that he wouldn't give up so easily. Passers-by stopped to watch. Sei continued to chase after her and noted that this assassin girl's throwing technique was surprisingly high. He raced through the street filled with people. Two men were watching the pursuit. One of them was a mustache. A girl with a staff in her hands ordered them to step aside. A dark-haired girl in a hood held a glowing staff in one hand and a wooden mug in the other. Her magic caused a gust of wind to rise, and the people standing nearby hurriedly moved aside. A frightened expression appeared on the thief's face, with beads of sweat running down his face. He was clutching several stolen items in his hands. Suddenly his feet left the ground and he was suspended in the air, clinging to his prey and screaming that he didn't understand what was happening. Debris and rocks rose into the air with him. The dark-haired girl directed the staff forward and said that this thief had just ruined her tea party. The next moment there was a roar, and everything around burst into flames and spun in a whirlwind. The girl with the staff, from which sparks were flying, squinted one eye and said that the thief must disappear. His face twisted in horror, and he began to fly away in a storm, dropping several things. The thief, drenched in sweat, with his mouth open and a tooth knocked out, screamed at the top of his lungs as he was whirled around in the merciless hurricane. Sei activated his ability and noted with a smile that this girl had excellent control over magic. A loud crash rang out from the roof of the house as the thief fell straight onto the tiles. Sei looked away in surprise and said that the girl had managed to contain the tornado's power so that it wouldn't destroy everything around it. But that was precisely why it lacked destructive power. The dark-haired girl turned away, holding a wooden mug. Several men stood before her, sweat glistening on their faces. One of them shouted nervously that the thief might still escape. The thief ran across the roof with the stolen goods, and Sei, looking at him, said grimly that he was wasting his time and energy for nothing. His cloak and hair fluttered in the gusts of wind. The short-haired blonde who had been throwing rocks earlier stood behind Sei and watched him closely, trying to understand his true strength. Sei adjusted his hood, smiled, and said that there were too many people on the street. But for the thief, it was the end. Smoke and flashes of lightning rose from under his feet. He smiled broadly and rushed forward. Activating his lightning step, Sei ran across the rooftops, while his shadow slipped under the cart and began to catch up with the thief already on the ground. The narrow street led him up, and he climbed to the roof, where the thief stood on one leg, convulsively holding the stolen goods in his hands. Sei jumped onto the roof, used his hands and feet to push himself off, and stretched his arms forward. The next moment, a crossbow appeared in his palms, from which a rope arrow flew out. The thief was racing across the roof, clutching his suitcase, when a rope released by Sei dropped above him. He looked up in fear and froze in fear. Sei almost caught up with him and smiled a sinister smile, showing off his white teeth while the fur on his hood fluttered in the wind. Having overtaken the thief, Sei, with a cold gleam in his eyes, said that one should not underestimate the profession of a porter. The thief's forehead was covered in sweat, and a scream of horror distorted his mouth. At that moment, Sei abruptly put his foot forward, and, making a low rotation, emitted a bright glow from the sole. His blow knocked the thief off balance, and he fell to the ground with a scream, but he continued to desperately clutch the suitcase. The thief closed his eyes, but heard a sharp clang and opened them. A black stone ring glittered on his leg, fettering his movements. He fell to the ground, not letting go of his prey. His body smashed through the wooden crate, scattering debris. Sei landed smoothly in a crouch, his cloak and hair swaying in the wind. The thief writhed on the remains of the box, groaning in pain, but not loosening his grip on the suitcase. Meanwhile, Sei slowly approached him. A dark shadow fell over the thief. His face, covered in sweat and scratches, was contorted with fear. He opened his mouth from which a knocked-out tooth protruded. Sei's face was gloomy, his eyes shining with a cold glow. Standing over the thief, he said that the game of chase was over if he did not wish to die. His gaze grew even fiercer, and he roared, demanding the suitcase be returned immediately. The thief, with iron shackles on his leg, convulsively clutched his prey to him. Suddenly, he became angry and threw the suitcase against the wall. This action stunned Sei, and the next moment, sharp metal blades flashed in the thief's hands. He began to quickly unscrew the nuts on the shackles, and the bolts fell to the ground. The lock clicked and opened. Sei watched in astonishment. Freed from his bonds, the thief dashed forward. He only silently watched as dust rose in the air. Smiling ominously, the thief blurted out that it was time to say goodbye, and that Sei was wrong to think he could catch him. However, his sentence was cut off abruptly. The next moment he was face down, his butt up, as Sei's foot pinned him to the ground. Sparks flew from Sei's foot, kicking up a cloud of dust. Sei glared at the thief and thought that he had only given him more work to do. A crowd had already gathered around, watching the scene. He picked up the suitcase lying next to him. The lock opened easily, and Sei decided that although there were many thieves in the world, at least he had to return Runamelia's things. But as soon as he lifted the suitcase, things began to fall out through the broken lock. The crowd looked at him with curiosity. Two girls nearby turned red and screamed in terror. Sei looked away in surprise, not understanding what had happened. One of the passers-by shouted that the object had rolled. Sei stood there with his suitcase in his hands, frozen. The people around him began to laugh and whisper loudly, looking at his confused appearance. On the ground lay several books and a strange elongated object. His gaze rested on it, his face breaking out in sweat, and genuine terror appeared in his eyes. Sei stood motionless, beads of sweat dripping from his face, and in his hands he clutched Runamelia's wooden suitcase. An incomprehensible object of strange shape lay nearby. What had fallen to the ground was frankly indecent. He was panting, sweating, and panicked, not knowing what to do next. An obscene object fell out of Runamelia's suitcase, causing Sei's hands to tremble. He was breathing heavily and couldn't take his eyes off it. Scarlet stood behind the girls, who were already screaming in shame. When she saw the object, she blushed and screamed even louder. Beads of sweat ran down his face, and he turned sharply to where Scarlet's scream had come from. His face became both frightened and focused. Sei held the suitcase, looking around nervously for a way out. His gaze fell on Zofie, who was only 16, with adults standing behind her. Zofie's face turned red. She measured the length of the object with her eyes and compared it to herself. Her face was covered in sweat and expressed surprise. She looked down in surprise, then back up at Sei, who was standing with his suitcase, sweating. A gust of wind lifted Zofie's cloak and she glanced at his hips. Everything around her froze in a depressing silence. Zofie's jacket had slipped off her shoulder. She rested her hand on her chin and her eyes were completely empty. Standing with her hand on her chin, Zofie was doing complex calculations in her head. A dark ribbon with a pendant hung around her neck. Sei kept his eyes on her face, but something distracted him. Runamelia stood apart from everyone, her headscarf on, the wind playing with her hair. She raised her hand and froze, staring straight ahead. Sei stood holding the suitcase and looked at her. Runamelia was silently looking straight at him. He looked down at the floor, sweat dripping down his face. His mind flashed back to the moment when the thief had snatched the suitcase, and he remembered the look on Runamelia's face. At that moment, she turned red, cried, and screamed that it was her suitcase. Realizing her reaction and putting everything together, Sei's face began to change. His features gradually relaxed. He closed his eyes and a slight smile appeared on his lips. He relaxed completely and began to lower the suitcase down. His face took on a calm expression as he turned to face Runamelia. When she saw this, she was frightened, covered her face with her hands and cried, choking with sobs. Sei's expression changed. He frowned and was afraid for her. Runamelia began to shake with fear. Her breathing was ragged, and her legs were shaking from the tension. Sei stared at her with his mouth open, beads of sweat dripping down his face. Then he covered his mouth and made a serious expression. His face gradually changed. A smile appeared on his lips, and he could barely hold back his laughter. The people around him froze, but when they heard his laughter, they were overcome with terror. Drops of sweat rolled down their frightened faces. Sei picked up the obscene object from the floor, holding the suitcase in his other hand. He began to say nervously that he was happy to fulfill the order. People shuddered and held out their hands. A crazy grin twisted his face, and he said that if this item were stolen, he would lose a customer. He held both the object and Runamelia's suitcase in his hands, his face filled with horror and his mouth wide open. Loudly, with a tear, he declared that the thing was very expensive. Scarlet stood nearby, all red, holding her hand to her face, and another girl, pale, was also standing nearby. On the other side of the crowd stood Zofie, her eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Behind her stood several men and a girl in a headscarf, all in shock. Sei, holding the suitcase and the object, turned to the driver, asking if he was okay and if he was not injured. The driver turned away and said that he was fine. Sei's face twisted into a mad expression again, and he exclaimed that he could cure the driver with magic and immediately relieve the pain. The driver feverishly refused. The driver had a bullet on his head. He started toward him, and the driver, covering himself with his hands, shouted in panic to keep him away. Two horse-drawn carts rolled slowly along a rocky road that led through a dense forest to the high mountains that towered ahead like dark giants. Sei was sitting on a bench inside the wagon, his legs crossed and his arms folded. Several men were sitting next to him, but they kept their distance. Inside were wooden chests and sacks of various goods. The carriage was silent, broken only by the clatter of horses' hooves and the creaking of wheels. Sei's expression was suspicious and wary, as if he were contemplating something dangerous. The two carts followed each other along a road that wound along the river. On one side were thickly planted trees, and behind them rose a dark forest, and on the other side were high mountain ranges. One of the carts was speeding along a rocky path with green grass and low bushes on both sides. The rhythmic sound of hooves cut through the air, echoing far around. Scarlet sat silent, her lips moving as if she were hesitating. Finally, raising her head, her face flushed and her eyebrows furrowed, She said that she wanted to pick flowers and asked the cart to stop. The dark-haired man in the hat, holding the reins, warned that these places were dangerous and full of monsters, so one should not stray far from the road. But Scarlet, keeping her voice confident, replied that she had fighting skills. The driver adjusted his hat and agreed that it was not bad. He allowed a short rest, but warned the girl to deal with the monster immediately if it happened. Both carts stopped in the middle of the stone road, and the travelers began to get out to stretch their legs. A river flowed nearby, beyond which rose a dark forest, and beyond it a view of snow-capped mountains opened up. This one also stepped onto the stone path, looked into the water, and saw his own reflection swaying with the current. He bowed his head and squinted his eyes, lost in thought. His hair was a little disheveled, and his hood was draped over his shoulders, exposing his face. Sei turned to Scarlet, saying that monsters might be lurking in these places, and he could check the area. But Scarlet, with her head down and eyes closed, remained silent, unwilling to accept his offer. Sei looked at her, and suddenly his expression changed to one of surprise, as if he had noticed something unexpected. He watched Scarlet as she walked away, radiating a palpable flow of magic. He realized that the girl could be probing the area with spells. She held her magic staff in her hands. Thinking, Scarlet slowly turned back to face Sei. Her face had a thoughtful expression. Her hair was falling in curls, and her lips seemed to be preparing to say something important. Turning around, she coldly and defiantly told Sei not to try to talk to her anymore because he seemed too strange. Sei smiled nervously, but these words angered him, and he began to follow her with a look full of anger. Suddenly, Sei's face changed. He felt someone's presence next to him and looked away, distracted from Scarlet. Zophie stood next to her. Her jacket had slipped off her shoulders, and her hair was tied back in a ponytail. She looked at Sei with a straight expression, while he looked at her in surprise, his hands in his pockets. He looked down at Zophie, who had her hands behind her back and was blushing, but her eyes were watching him intently. The grass was growing thickly beside the road at that moment. Sei spoke in surprise, asking if she needed anything from him. The forests and high mountains darkened in the background. Zophie blushed even more, put her hand to her lips and thought. She raised her hands, her face flushed with shame, and began asking meaningless questions. Sei smiled nervously, closed his eyes, and said that she must have misunderstood him. They both looked towards the river and the surrounding forest. Then Sei broke the silence by saying that the item in question had indeed been ordered. Zophie replied that he shouldn't pretend, because she knew someone who also liked such things. Sei continued to stare off into the distance and quietly added that he was primarily interested in women. But Zophie interrupted him, saying that he should choose one thing and not stand too close to her. After that, she stepped aside. Suddenly, a piercing scream rang out nearby. Sei stiffened sharply, his expression changed, and he turned in that direction. Zophie also looked in that direction in surprise. Sei jumped up and rushed at the sound of the scream. Zophie remained standing while he broke through the trees and bushes. He already had a weapon in his hands, and he mentally noted that monsters often gathered near bodies of water. He pushed through the thick undergrowth, slashing away branches with his sword. His face remained serious, but his thoughts were wary. The silence around him meant that there might be not only predators but real monsters here. He was running through the bushes and suddenly saw a tree broken in half and lying on the ground. This made him very wary, and he became even more careful. Running out into the open, Sei stopped abruptly and dropped to one knee. His hair and cloak were blowing in the wind, and a cloud of dust rose from his landing. His eyes lit up, and he looked around sharply. A huge monster appeared before him with a gaping mouth, from which sharp teeth protruded, and thick saliva flowed along with the steam. Sei took up a fighting stance, his weapon clenched in his hands. A gigantic monster with enormous claws and a body made of lynx like the shell of a scolopendra loomed over him. Standing in front of the huge monster, Sei activated his assessment ability. The characteristics appeared before him. The monster was a giant red-cheeked giant with a level 25. Sei calmly looked up at the beast, his coolness intact. His hair and cloak fluttered in the wind, his body shifting slightly to the side in battle readiness. The boy's gaze slid to the side, where he spotted Scarlet. She was lying on the ground, holding a staff, her underwear down, her cheeks flushed with shame. The stream that erupted from Scarlet's body was absorbed into the ground. Behind them were picturesque forests and mountains, but next to them a monster loomed menacingly. Sei spun around, one hand raised, the other clutching a sharp sword. He leaned forward, a faint smile touching his lips. The wind stirred the leaves around him. Raising his blade, he said seriously that he had not expected to see such beauty in this place. Scarlet, still sitting on the ground, was burning with shame and clutching her staff. Hearing his words, the girl blushed even more and cried out in despair that he had seen everything. Her voice trembled with embarrassment. Say closed his eyes and smiled contentedly, saying that Scarlet was right. He had indeed seen everything, and in the best possible quality. A giant monster rose up before the hero. Its mouth opened in a predatory smile, demonstrating its readiness to attack at any moment. The boy carefully watched the monster's movements, his sword at the ready. He realized that the beast was not approaching, and the predator's instinct told him to track down his prey. The young man confidently grabbed the weapon more conveniently. He decided that the monster was too confident in its own strength, so he was in no hurry to attack, considering the fight easy. Tired of waiting, the hero decided to act himself. He didn't care who started the fight, so he took on this responsibility and moved forward. Concentrating, he said that he was using the magic infusion technique. Raising his sword, he pointed the blade at the enemy, preparing to deliver a devastating blow. The monster lunged forward, its fang-filled mouth gaping open. The boy's blow struck directly into its armored skull, causing the beast to let out an angry growl. The beast reared up on its hind legs, towering over the boy, who seemed tiny and defenseless. But the hero did not think of retreating and remained steadfast in the fight. His gaze fell on the sword he was gripping tightly, but with horror the young man saw that the blade had shattered against the monster's strong armor, leaving him without a weapon. The reborn bearer cursed in his mind, but outwardly he pretended to be unfazed. Looking the beast straight in the eyes, he understood that he had to stand his ground in order to find a way to win. A majestic forest spread out beneath the mountains. The wind rustled the leaves, creating a feeling of the living breath of nature. In the distance, a flock of birds appeared, frightened by something in the thickets. A fragile figure of a girl could be seen among the thickets. She made her way through the thorny thickets, spreading the branches with her hands, and each step was not easy for her. Suddenly there was a rustling sound. The girl became wary, because anyone could be lurking in these thickets. But suddenly an unknown monster appeared right in front of her nose. The monster, ignoring her, rushed forward, chasing the main character, who couldn't break away. The beast snapped its fangs, trying to grab him. Without stopping the pursuit, the monster let out a menacing roar and was ready to grab the boy. The hero fell down sharply, deciding to take the monster away from the girl. He thought about luring the enemy deeper into the forest so he could slip out later, but at the same time, he wondered if he shouldn't return to his comrades and fight together. As he pondered, he suddenly heard a shout ordering him to step back and let someone else strike. The young man looked around in shock, for the voice came from nowhere. Meanwhile, the girl, who was hiding between the trunks of old trees, decided not to miss the opportunity and help. She grabbed a knife from under her cloak and rushed into battle. Holding the blade in her palm, the heroine boldly moved forward, ready to deliver a devastating blow and save the boy from the danger that loomed over him. The brave girl jumped high and brought the knife down, stabbing it into the monster's armor. The blade scratched the armor and even tore it in places. The beast roared in pain. The wounded beast fell heavily to the ground, uttering a violent roar that would have made anyone flinch. The girl also landed and by inertia sliced through its shell all the way to its tail. The protagonist rushed towards her, calling her name and urging Lola to stop. He shouted that her dagger was too small to do mortal damage to the monster. At that moment, the girl sensed danger and turned around sharply. She realized with horror that the monster's heavy tail with steel spikes on the end was flying straight at her. The blow hits the target, sending the girl's feather-light body flying far back. She was startled, but escaped with only a cut on her leg from a thorn, and her knife broke. But the biggest problem is that the trajectory changed by the blow threw the heroine straight into the monster's gaping mouth full of sharp fangs. She flew helplessly, gripped by terror. At a critical moment, a young man comes to the rescue. With a sharp movement, he knocks the girl off course, hugs her, and covers her with his body, protecting her from the monster and carrying her to a safe distance. The hero looks back to see how far they have escaped from the pursuit. Jumping from branch to branch, he holds the girl in his arms, covering their tracks and leading the enemy away from him. Making sure that the monster has left, the young man stops to rest. He drops onto a branch of a giant tree and carefully releases the frightened girl from his arms. She lands heavily, with a noticeable groan. The young man helps her sit comfortably and asks how she feels after what she has experienced. The heroine replies that she is fine, although she did not expect the battle to be so difficult and the enemy to be so strong. The protagonist looks carefully in the direction they came from and notices that the monster is no longer chasing them. This both calms and alarms him. Meanwhile, heavy breathing can be heard nearby. The exhausted girl is covered in sweat and is breathing heavily. The pain from the wound on her leg begins to intensify, making her tremble. The young man notices her deteriorating condition. He takes out a piece of cloth to bandage her leg and stop the bleeding. The boy says it looks like a weak poison that the monster's thorn has injected into the wound. The caring hero bandages the girl's wound. She thanks him, and he explains that his friend Luna Maria is a nun and possesses holy magic that can heal her. A girl appears under the tree and calls the hero by name. He takes the wounded woman in his arms and says that she has arrived in time. He turns to Luna Maria with a request to help, if she really can. Waiting for an answer, the young man is lost in thought. He realizes that something was wrong with this monster from the beginning. It is much more dangerous than it seemed at first glance. He also remembers that the sorceress he was supposed to protect relied too much on her own strength. He still wonders how no one noticed this giant monster roaming freely in the forest. The guy analyzes his opponent's abilities and comes to the conclusion that the numerous legs on his body allow him to accelerate instantly. This drastically reduces the victim's chances of survival. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he thoughtfully hugs the injured girl and continues to think. A terrifying thought strikes him. If such a creature wants to sneak up unnoticed, it could attack from underground. This thought makes the hero freeze in fear. And indeed, at that very moment, a monster emerges from the ground, trying to swallow the heroes. Suddenly, the ground rises up and the beast's mouth catches the air. The young man pushes himself upwards with all his might, avoiding the deadly jaws. Keeping his balance, he saves himself and the girl from instant death. Because of its length, the monster rises above the forest, catching up with the fugitive. One of the bone blades with which it tore the ground crackles with a sharp sound. Steam erupts from its body. Sparks of lightning run across its shell. The young man, still holding the girl in his arms, flies back. He admits with irritation that the monster almost got them with its blades and appeared too unexpectedly. A nun, who happened to witness the scene, watches in horror. She screams, calling his name, and begs him to be okay after such an attack. Looking back at his friend's voice, the hero notices something terrible. A monster is sneaking up on her from behind. The guy in despair shouts to Luna Maria to turn around immediately. A chill runs down her back, binding her body. She realizes in horror that the monster is rushing straight at her, choosing a defenseless target. The hero quickly lands and places his companion in a safe place among the roots of a sprawling tree. Only after making sure of this does he turn his attention back to Luna Maria and shout to her to save herself. But the girl's expression suddenly changes. She looks at him proudly and confidently with her playful eyes, silently making it clear that she has no intention of running away. She grabs her weapon, which looks like a heavy stick, and assumes a fighting stance. Looking at the approaching monster, the girl loudly declares that she is ready to take all its attacks. Her weapon begins to glow in her hands, illuminating everything around her. She holds her staff in front of her, preparing to face the enemy. Luna Maria carefully watches her opponent's movements, reading their intentions. She keeps her weapon at the ready to instantly repel the first blow. In the heat of the moment, the nun rushes forward, shouting that she will not allow the monster to touch Saya-sama. Her weapon begins to emit sparks of lightning, threatening the enemy. At a sufficient distance, the girl swings and strikes with all her strength. Her blow is so powerful that it knocks the monster's head back, as if from a lightning explosion. The main character abruptly jumps up and rushes towards the nun. The young man is full of determination, ready at any moment to rush to the aid of his friend in the battle with the monster. His gaze is focused, his face is full of unwavering confidence. He moves with surprising speed and agility, kicking up clouds of dust under his feet. Concentrating all his energy in his feet, the young man soars up the monster's body, aiming to reach its head and deliver a devastating blow. When he is near the monster's head, he jumps up, preparing to attack. The young man's appearance is so sudden that the monster does not immediately notice him. He did not expect to meet the hero so close. On the fly, the desperate man begins to assemble his weapon. Every movement must be lightning fast, otherwise the chance for an attack will be lost. The last piece snaps into place, completing the assembly. Having completed his preparations, the young man rushes into the attack. With a powerful swing of his homemade axe, he cuts off one of the two bladed plates on the monster's head. The forest trembles from the beast's terrifying roar. The monster, wheezing and making deadly sounds, loses its orientation. Its mouth opens wide, and its body flies helplessly downward, crashing into the ground, making a roar. The hero pushes off the falling body of the monster. He solemnly throws the axe into the air and in a loud voice tells Luna Maria that he considers this blow brilliant, because the result exceeded expectations. The young man's attentive gaze rests on the weapon in his friend's hands. He notes its strange color and texture, assuming that it is made of a rare material known as red iron. The young man explains that although red iron is softer than normal, it conducts magic much better. So if the nun passes her power through it, the strength and power increase many times over. He had no idea it was so strong. He wonders, how could such a monster, capable of breaking through even solid earth, succumb to a blow from a club? This seems incredible and further emphasizes Lunameria's power. The young man looks at his girlfriend with fire in his eyes and warns her that now the most interesting part will begin. Smiling slightly, he apologizes in advance, because he will definitely show off further. At that moment, the monster's massive body crashes to the ground, rolling over and kicking up clouds of dust. In the whirlwind of movement, Lunameria is thrown aside. She hits the tree trunk painfully, choking from the sudden landing. The nun groans in pain in her back, but she immediately notices that the monster, still alive, looms over her, preparing for another attack. Its low growl and the predatory gleam in its eyes chill her heart. She realizes in horror that she has fallen into a trap. She shouts "No!" with terrible despair, not believing that the monster is still alive after all the wounds it has received. Lunameria frantically searches for a weapon to at least somehow defend herself, but the staff lies far away. There is no way to reach it now. The monster, hovering above her, stares down ominously. Its mouth stretches in a predatory smile, ready to swallow the girl at any moment. A moment later, he is there. His huge mouth is open for a deadly bite. Lunameria steps back and screams in despair, begging him not to do this. Deeply believing, she closes her eyes and begins to pray, begging the Lord for salvation. All the years of her life flash in her memory, and her heart accepts the inevitable end. And at that very moment, the main character appears out of thin air between her and the monster. As if the heard prayer had come to life, he covers his friend with his body, ready to sacrifice himself to save her. The girl's eyes fill with happiness and delight. She was ready to accept death, but now she sees her savior standing in front of her like a wall. She calls out his name, Saya-sama. The young man concentrates intensely, his brows furrowed, and he directs all his strength and attention to the coming decisive blow. Having assumed a fighting stance, he applies the learned technique. A field appears around him, where an energetic vortex swirls, and just then, as if summoned by magic, the monster's severed blade falls beside him. The ground rumbles under the weight of the metal. The clever young man grabs the sharp edge of this blade. He takes aim, preparing to strike the decisive blow and finish off the enemy who has done them so much harm. After waiting for the monster to fly to the desired distance, the hero throws the blade with force. Spinning in the air, it flies like a shuriken and crashes into the beast with a bone crunch. The blade does not stop and cuts through the monster's body diagonally, dividing it into two parts. The young man remains in a fighting stance, carefully observing the aftermath of the attack. His eyes burn with curiosity and cold determination. He stares without looking away at his fallen enemy, cut into pieces. His face at this moment is serious and stern, full of courage. Lunameria, filled with admiration and gratitude, looks at him. She realizes that he risked his own life to save her from mortal danger. She turns to Sayasami, who is calmly examining his neatly done work. The girl says that she feels that he is the one. Her gaze is directed further, to the quiet forest that spreads out behind him. As a child, Lunameria loved to read the book The Wandering Path of the Holy Virgin. In any free moment, she would pick it up again and reread it, as if searching for a hidden meaning. That story was about the journey of a young saint who traveled the worlds, healing the poor and punishing sinners. Her path was full of trials, but her mission always shone with the light of truth. Lunameria remembered how the saint had faced dangers countless times, but there was always someone who came to her aid. He became her shield, saving her from suffering and leading her onward. At the end of the book, it was revealed that this young man was an apostle of God. The Lord himself had sent him to lead the holy path of truth as she wandered among people, seeking those in need of healing. The heroes she had so often encountered on the pages of books also lived in her heart. And now Sei reminded her of that heavenly apostle, as if sent from above to support and protect. The protagonist stood triumphantly before the monster's body, cut in two. His heart was filled with pride for defeating such a dangerous enemy. Steam rose from the bloody remains, enveloping everything in a white haze. The girl couldn't take her eyes off him. The young man turned around, smiled slyly, and asked if everything was okay. His charm seemed even more vivid at that moment, because he had just saved her life. The heroine's cheeks flushed with a deep blush. She looked at her savior with confusion and tenderness, unable to find the words to answer. She only softly and dreamily uttered his name. Above them hung a monster cut in two, which even in this form looked terrifying. Its silhouettes were frightening, as if the shadow of the threat had not yet completely receded. Lunameria trembled with fear, looking at the outlines of the monster. It seemed to her that he was still alive, In despair, the girl shouted to Sei, asking if he was truly defeated, since the body had not yet fallen to the ground. Both heroes looked intently at the carcass of the giant insect. Steam was constantly rising from its entrails, and alarming sounds were coming from within. A feeling reigned in their hearts, similar to the calm before the storm. Suddenly, everything exploded, and a flash of blinding light illuminated the figures of the heroes. The explosion lifted a mushroom cloud into the sky, and the roar frightened the birds, who flew screaming from the forest. A girl suddenly appeared behind the stunned heroes. She laughed sharply, watching the young men's reactions and seeming to enjoy their fright. Her cheeks were flushed, and her voice was filled with sinister delight. She turned to the monster, mockingly asking how the monstrous insect felt now that it had been defeated. Sei and Lunamuria turned to the girl. She did not stop laughing, on the contrary. Her laughter became louder and harsher. Their surprised eyes met her mockery, and their tired faces expressed only incomprehension. Meanwhile, a cart pulled by 2 horses was moving through the forest. The warrior stood with his foot resting on a dead monster lying in the middle of the clearing. The beast was defeated and showed no signs of life. The hero who stepped on it rejoiced with his comrades, celebrating their victory over the monsters that had met them on their way. His friend cheered wildly, expressing his joy with his whole body. Lunamuria performed miracles of healing. Her magic, known far and wide, healed the wounds of the wounded. People watched with hope as the light of her power gave them life. Standing nearby was Lolia, the protagonist's friend, who was saved by him just like the nun herself. She watched the healing process with fascination. The nun assured her that everything would be fine now, and Lolia, feeling relieved, admitted in amazement that it was incredible. Lolia turned to Lunamuria and expressed her heartfelt gratitude for her mercy. But she only smiled and quietly replied that there was no need to thank her, as all the credit belonged to Seiya. Lolia opened her eyes in surprise when she heard that the young man's name was Sesama. She didn't even know the name of her savior, so this discovery only increased her interest and admiration for him. At this time, a strange woman approached the men, who were still rejoicing in their victory. She solemnly exclaimed that one of the creatures turned out to be the larva of a giant red-headed centipede that lives in these parts. The woman explained that such creatures were poisonous and extremely dangerous. Perhaps the place was rarely sprinkled with holy water because of its remoteness from the city. Fortunately, most of the people present were experienced adventurers. One of the comrades remarked that if it had been a full-grown monster, they could have made a fortune selling its remains. But the other replied that they had already given their all in the fight, and would hardly have survived a full-grown creature. Lolia, standing nearby, overheard their conversation. She heard one of the men say that things would have turned out completely differently if a real hero had been by their side at such a difficult moment. The girl slowly turned and met the gaze of Lunamuria, who sat on the ground with a distant expression. Her eyes were clouded with dreams and memories of the young man who had reminded her so much that night of the apostle from her favorite book. Meanwhile, the young warrior spread out his instruments in front of him. Whistling a cheerful melody, he leisurely fumbled around in the entrails of the defeated monster, cutting and removing them with his own hands. With a piece of cloth in his teeth, the young man stood there, thinking hard. He carefully searched the monster's interior for something extremely important that might be of great value to him. Suddenly, from the entrails of the defeated beast, he pulled out a wondrous stone of incredible purity and masterful cutting. Its radiance immediately amazed everyone who was nearby. Sei carefully took the stone in his palm and held it up to the sunlight. He studied the artifact for a few moments, then determined that this magical crystal belonged to the 7th class of all possible ones. The young man realizes that he has found a truly rare stone, which can fetch 2 large silver coins if he decides to sell it, and it is also quite suitable as a material for making healing medicines. The witch imperceptibly approaches him from behind and quietly asks if he really saw everything. The young man feigns indifference and replies that he really didn't notice anything, although inside he is trying hard to hide his excitement. The girl stares at him intently and says that even this reaction speaks for itself and exposes him much more than any words. The young man tries to act indifferent, but fails miserably. He pretends to ask the witch what exactly she means, adding that he was completely focused on the centipede and did not understand where it was leading. The heroine follows him step by step, and in a serious voice tells him to listen carefully. She warns him that if he says anything, she will fry him just like that monster. The young man replies that he doesn't understand anything, but he won't tell anyone anyway. Here Lunamuria intervenes in the conversation. She turns to the witch and says that this is too much. After all, he risked his life fighting the monster. Lolia confirms that without him the outcome of the battle would have been completely different. The witch didn't expect such pressure from her friends. She begins to hesitate, awkwardly agreeing that perhaps they are right. But she doesn't dare to finish her thought, because she herself doubts her own words. The main character smiles awkwardly and looks at the young witch, but she clicks her tongue in disgust, blushes in annoyance, and mumbles something incomprehensible to herself, full of irritation. In the background, mountains rise, surrounded by a dense forest. A line of carts slowly moves along the road, their wheels creaking loudly on the stones. A voice comes from one of the carriages, asking permission to introduce itself to the heroes once again. The voice belongs to Luna Maria. She calmly says that she is a nun of the Holy Church, and adds that she is currently on a monastic journey and is thinking about how she can accomplish the feat and overcome the labyrinth in Lotus. Lolia also decides to introduce herself. She admits that she belongs to the assassin clan and once worked for a large organization, but after a tragic event she was eliminated, so now she dreams of becoming an adventurer in Lotus. The third girl calls herself Scarlet. She is a sorceress who graduated with honors from the Royal Academy of Magic. Despite numerous offers, she chose the path of an adventurer because she wants to become a real witch. It's the protagonist's turn. He introduces himself as Sei, a simple carrier. The guy smiles slyly and jokingly adds that he's on the same team as Luna Maria-sama herself. The reincarnated porter confesses that he himself plans to become an adventurer in Lotus. Lolia happily replies that this is their shared dream. Scarlet notices that the carriage itself is taking them straight to Lotus. The nun enthusiastically exclaims that all this is the undoubted will of God. She believes that no event in this world occurs without the Lord's knowledge. She turns to her companions and suggests, if they are already friends and comrades, why don't they create their own group of adventurers led by the protagonist? The sorceress, shocked by these words, shouts indignantly that this will never happen. Lolia, on the other hand, enthusiastically supports the idea. She says that she is ready to join without any hesitation, because the hero saved her life in a fight with a monster, and now she is indebted to him. In addition, he has proven himself to be a capable young man. The witch looks at her and says that she is too naive. She warns that Lolia is only making this choice because she has not seen any real adventurers yet, because Lotus is full of people like him. She adds one more thing. If the rumor spreads that she is on the same team as the guy, her reputation will be tarnished. The young man agrees, admitting that it would indeed be bad if anyone found out about the unfortunate incident. The girl the hero has been teasing suddenly jumps to her feet and begins waving her arms wildly. She shouts at the young man, accusing him of revealing her secret and now blackmailing him, while the carriage continues rolling along the road towards the mountains. When the heroes arrive in the city, it is already night on its outskirts. The group of adventurers stops at a hotel and decides to spend the night in cozy cottages, and in the morning to set off further, to Lotus. One of the girls exclaims with delight when she sees their future accommodations. The protagonist proudly says that he has booked 2 cottages with a garden. The nun, who has rarely spent the night in such luxurious places, is sincerely delighted. The young man explains that when he was looking for a hotel, only these 2 houses were available. The accommodation there was not cheap, so he wanted to make sure that his companions were satisfied. The girl replied that it was not a problem at all. Suddenly, the hero remembers something important. He sighs heavily, takes out a brand new suitcase, and hands it to the nun. The girl is surprised to receive an unexpected gift. The guy explains that he bought the suitcase to replace the one that broke during the hustle and bustle today. He knows how important it is to her, so he asks her to use this one. Luna Maria blushes, tenderly calls the hero's name and thanks him for the valuable gift. She is grateful for everything he has done, and is already beginning to perceive him as her patron, even comparing him to the apostle from her favorite book. The guy just smiles awkwardly and says he doesn't understand what she's talking about. In his opinion, members of the same team should look out for each other and have each other's backs when needed. He's convinced that anyone would do the same. The hero adds that they have a wonderful hotel, so he advises the girl to have a good rest in her room and gain strength for the next day. The nun gratefully agrees, happy for his concern. The boy waves and walks away, leaving the girl standing at the cottage porch. She stares after him for a long time, filled with gratitude and a little embarrassment. Having moved away, the hero sighs with relief and thinks to himself. He tells himself that now he can pretend that strange device never existed. He heads to his room, pondering everything he heard on the way. He has no proof, but the hero is sure that the girl had a reason to use that thing. He decides to believe her, even without proof. The boy's gaze rises to the moon hanging over the mountains. He firmly tells himself that he will fulfill his plan. And the girl, holding a suitcase, is embarrassed by the porch after a gift from the hero. The events are transferred to a garden bathed in moonlight. In a distant corner stands a large tub for bathing guests, and nearby, a copper vat of water is heating in a fire. Singing echoes in the air, reflecting the hero's joyful mood. The guy removes the vat from the flame and pours hot water into the tub, diluting the cold water. To create romance, he throws flower petals into the water, preparing to carry out his plan. He steps carefully into the tub, feeling the warm water envelop his body under the night sky. The young man stretches his legs out with relief and places them on the edge, enjoying the long-awaited rest. The hero exclaims with delight that an open fountain under the starry sky is the best invention. His words sound confident, and he himself decides to fully enjoy the beauty of the garden from time to time. The young man sighs with relief again, enjoying the moment. But suddenly something comes to his mind, and he says that he almost forgot about one important thing. He notes with displeasure that the drink next to him doesn't look like Japanese juice at all. But in a moment he forgets about it and returns to the pleasant moment, exhaling loudly after a sip. The young man looks up at the moon and thinks that perhaps the pure-hearted nun has never bathed in the open air. He considers taking the opportunity to invite her to his place, but the next moment the hero drives away the thoughts, deciding that it is just a joke. After all, the girl would never dare to sit in the same bath with her husband. He firmly tells himself not to invite her to avoid trouble, but thoughts take over him again. The hero thinks that perhaps his dream is not so unattainable after all. After all, circumstances and a recent discovery make him think that everything could turn out differently. His imagination paints a picture. He leans over the bewildered girl, lavishing her with compliments, calling her charming. In his dreams, he begs to show her even more of her delicate beauty. The young man tries to imagine the girl's reaction. He thinks she will look away, shyly covering her body, and in a trembling voice, begin to beg Sasama not to look at her innocent purity. Then he turns to her in a dream, reminding her that they are friends. The hero says that she has nothing to be ashamed of because she can relax with him. But the girl protests, emphasizing that she is a servant of God. The young man gently calls her by her name, Luna Miria. In a quiet, slow, and seductive voice, he says that it doesn't matter to him at all. The passionate young man looks straight into her eyes and claims that she is irreplaceable to him. The girl can see it for herself. He adds that he has already opened up to her completely and is now ready to give her his body. He stares into her trusting, wide-open eyes, convincing her to trust him. The hero says she should open up to him and let the more experienced one lead the way. The girl slightly opens her hot lips and says his name in a tone as if she were under a spell, unable to resist. The nun's shame dissipates. She leans forward, approaching the hero's red-hot body. She sincerely says that she is glad for his trust and admits that she did not even know how much he valued her. She reveals herself completely to him, tenderly saying his name. The moved girl asks the young man to explore every inch of her body so that he will forever imprint it in his memory. The boy rises from the water, stretching his stiff back. His gaze is directed towards the night sky as he tries to organize his thoughts, completely confused by his ardent fantasies. The protagonist takes the container of drink and raises it to his lips. His heart beats faster because he is too excited by his own imagination to remain calm. After taking a sip, he runs his hand through his hair, plunging into thought again. The hero decides not to miss such an opportunity and tempt fate, saying aloud that he will invite the object of his fantasies to the font. The young man abruptly jumps out of the tub, convincing himself that he is not thinking anything bad. He decides only to help the girl regain her strength, and runs through the garden, repeating that he is simply looking for a friend. The protagonist heads to the girl's cottage. On the way, he grabs a towel and ties it around his waist so as not to scare the nun off the threshold. He tries to calm his own heart. Finally, he approaches the door and prepares to knock. He calls Muni Maria's name loudly to warn her of his arrival. Suddenly, he hears a soft moan in her voice, which makes him freeze in surprise. In his mind, he exclaims that it was too close. The young man cautiously sneaks up to the door, trying to eavesdrop. He asks himself if the heroine is really talking to someone in her room. He freezes, listening to the silence, but the rustling disappears. The young man concludes that the girl is talking to herself. He wonders if she can talk in her sleep. But again his ears catch fragments of phrases. The nun excitedly calls his name. Her breathing becomes heavy, and her voice, full of tenderness, confesses her love to him. The protagonist stands numbly at the door, stunned by what he has heard. He expected to hear anything, but not this confession, which makes his heart pound wildly. The girl continues her reverie, faintly whispering his name and confessing her love. She squeezes her legs and continues to say that the main character is strong and courageous, because it was he who protected her from the predatory beast. In the dream, the heroine admits that the young man is her ideal. She turns around in bed, hugging the pillow, as if she sees the boy instead of her, and repeats again that she is in love with him. The boy hears this confession and leans against the cottage wall, shocked by her words. The girl continues to moan, calling him her apostle, and it sounds so sincere that the hero's heart shrinks. The young man thinks. He realizes that he heard something he shouldn't have heard. The hero decides that now everything is clear to him, because from the first meeting he felt special trust and tenderness from her. He recalls the biblical stories about the saint's pilgrimage, which the girl often reread. There, the apostle of God protects the saint, and the hero realizes the nun sees in him the image of this very apostle. However, he smiles bitterly. For him, there can be no such title as apostle of God. In his memories of Muni Maria, the boy understands that this cruel world is too cruel for her. He sadly thinks that everything he wanted to protect to the last was always ruthlessly taken away from him by this world, and so it continued throughout his life. The boy feels as if his very existence proves that God is against him. All the losses and suffering remind him of this again and again. With a heavy heart, the hero decides that a porter like him will never be able to live up to the expectations of the pure and beautiful Lunamiria. She is too far from him, and the gap between them only grows wider every day. Turning sadly, he is about to leave. But he imagines himself as a great traveler in the future, deciding that to win the girl's heart, he must become the one who is able to protect what is dearest. The boy comes to the conclusion that until he learns this, he must pretend that he has not heard anything. But suddenly her moaning comes from the cottage again. She calls his name and talks enthusiastically about the device. The young man shudders in horror when he hears the girl scream, as if asking him to come in. Her moans and cries become louder and louder, and the nun demands greater depth for complete satisfaction. The guy starts running down the porch in a panic, embarrassed by the fact that she is so openly giving in to passion. Moreover, she keeps screaming his name. The hero is ready to give everything to make her stop. But eventually he finds a crack in the window frame and decides to peek in. His gaze wanders inside, where he sees the girl moving her hands helplessly. The boy's eyes widen. He didn't expect to see the girl in such a frank and shy pose that it upsets his soul. The heroine cries loudly and exclaims that she loves him. She tosses and turns on the bed, dreaming that Sasama reciprocates her love. At the same time, she touches herself and dreams of a child from him. The girl's words strike him like a thunderbolt. The boy understands that the nun cannot return to worldly life, but still he is unable to suppress the strange tremor he feels when contemplating her. And at the moment when she again exclaims that she loves him, something inevitable begins to rise under the hero's towel, betraying the strength of his desire. The nun leans back and tearfully asks for his forgiveness, admitting that she imagines him every time she feels this way. She reproaches herself, calling herself a saint who has become a sinner. The girl describes aloud how she imagines their union, speaking of the depth and wild desire. She calls herself bad, but desires more, demanding that the young man give himself to her and give her a child. She bends over as if he were really there, and touches her own body, imagining his touch. A series of short cries ends with one, desperate and passionate, bursting from the depths of her soul. All this time, the hero, without looking up, watches through the crack. The girl almost reaches the peak of her bliss, her body arching in a final surge. Suddenly, the object that was helping her slips from her hands and falls with a clatter. The boy immediately recognizes the same device he found earlier. The exhausted nun lies back on the bed. The object remains on the floor with a dull thud. Her body is still naked, but now a warm wave of relaxation envelops it. The confused hero continues to look through the crack. Her gaze is hazy, her breathing is gradually evened out. But for him, she has revealed herself from a completely different side, like he has never seen before. Lunamiria holds the device she has just used in front of her. With her hands folded, she looks as if she's about to begin her evening prayers. And suddenly, loudly and confidently, she utters the words of purification. Suddenly, a creature with wings and a glow above its head appears before her. The celestial maiden with wings lifts the object and begins to clean it of the remains. The main character watches the event in shock. He is struck by the fact that even in such a situation, the nun does not forget about prayer, as if seeking protection from heaven. The winged girl continues to clean the device, her eyes lowered with such humility and majesty that it resembles a sacred ritual. A soft magical glow begins to emanate from the cottage. Meanwhile, the action moves to the narrow streets of the night city. Lolia walks leisurely among the dark houses, greedily finishing a fragrant piece of bread. Suddenly, her attention is drawn to something slowly approaching from afar. The protagonist goes out to meet the girl. The shadowy killer asks him questions, wondering if he is really who she thinks he is. She confesses that she decided to go for a walk that evening to enjoy the darkness. Her gaze slides down, and in surprise she exclaims that the hero is hard as a rock. She notes that this is noticeable even through his pants. The young man agrees awkwardly, trying to avoid further conversation. He tells his friend that too many events have happened that day. It's as if a short circuit has occurred in the hero's head. He feels that just a little more, and his consciousness will explode from an oversaturation of emotions. The young man openly declares that he should go to a brothel to relieve some tension and freshen up. The girl glances at his pants and asks with a smile if his brain is pulsing in them. The guy indifferently walks past the woman he's talking to and says that's all for him, if she lets him. He's about to leave, but the girl, surprised by his coldness, calls out to him to stop. She warns him that since this is his first time here, he should know one important thing he missed. The hero curiously asks what exactly she means. The girl explains that there is no brothel in this place. The young man turns to her in horror, not knowing how to deal with the problem that prevents him from even thinking calmly. Stunned, he exclaims and asks her again, "Is there really no brothel in this town?" She replies that the town is small and she's already checked everything. It's the closest settlement to Lotus, so it seems there's simply no demand for something like this here. The girl adds that their squad will arrive in Lotus tomorrow. She advises him to be patient, but the hero understands. After what he saw in the cottage, he will no longer be able to calm his own anxiety. The guy says with irritation that at this rate he will be overcome by a mad desire to grab someone right in the car on the road tomorrow. He realizes that this is the worst-case scenario for the upcoming journey. The girl smiles slyly and reaches for his pants. Touching them, she notes in amazement that the size of the young man's device is impressive. She adds defiantly that he's about to explode. The guy jumps away from her and screams for her to stop touching him. But she gets more serious and says that the hero saved her today when the monster almost killed her. So, as a sign of gratitude, she decided to help him in her own way. The action is transferred to a dark alley between houses. People calmly walk past, not even suspecting what is happening in the dark corner. The girl works diligently with her lips, occasionally looking up at the hero to catch her breath, and then bends down to his pants again. The young man breathes heavily and in short bursts. With each movement, the hero's breathing becomes faster and hotter. Stroking her hair, he moans softly. Finally, he can't hold back and exclaims, telling his partner how incredibly good he feels right now. The girl doesn't answer him with words, but instead continues with redoubled enthusiasm. She pushes the hero to the limit, forcing him to barely hold back a scream from a wave of pleasure. The guy looks down at the girl and holds her head in an authoritative manner with his palm. He likes to feel like he's the one dominating the situation. The boy hears the voices of people on the busy street. Their shadows flicker around the corner, right next to him. The hero strains with all his might, restraining himself so as not to draw unnecessary attention with any sound. The girl breaks away from him for a moment to rest. She wipes the residue from her chin and leans back into the hero's fly, this time changing her technique. Finally, she finishes the job and steps aside, rising from her knees. Smiling, the girl thanks the guy for allowing her to receive a kind of treat. She enthusiastically says that its size is impressive, and the amount of discharge will never cease to amaze her. The guy in response admits that she surprised him quite a bit too, and praises her skill. The reincarnated carrier asks how often the girl does something like this for men. But she asks him not to take everything literally. She only paid off a debt and is not going to give such gifts to everyone. The heroine shares the truth. The former director of the company where she worked had strange passions. She performed similar services for him in exchange for rewards, so she learned various techniques. The guy says with sadness in his voice that everything is clear now. He realizes that the boss used his position and money to satisfy his own whims at her expense. The hero decides that this is not strange for another world. He is once again convinced of its cruelty. The law of survival of the fittest reigns here, and society is built on inequality. The guy stops the girl who is about to leave. He offers to make a deal, asking her opinion. He says that he noticed that Lolia doesn't have any potions with her. He asks if that's really the case. The girl replies that she's never been seriously injured or poisoned, and she has enough money. That's exactly what the hero was counting on. He looks her straight in the eye and says, "For an adventurer, potions are a necessity, because their presence often decides whether you live or die." He adds that he has many such potions. The guy continues. If the girl wants, he'll even give a few for free. But in return, he asks her to help him physically, although he immediately corrects himself. He'd rather support his friend when he needs it. She thinks for a moment, then agrees, admitting that the deal is profitable. At the same time, Lolia thinks the price is too low, so she demands that the hero also pay for her room. The guy agrees without hesitation. Not wanting to waste time, she suggests going straight to her home and finishing the job there. She says it's very close. The hero willingly follows her, following the indicated path. They walk through narrow, dark streets and climb the stairs to Lolia's room. The stairs are quite steep, so the boy looks around with curiosity. In the room, the hero involuntarily lingers his gaze on the girl who is slowly taking off her jacket, exposing her delicate and fragile shoulders. The young man decides to follow her example and also takes off his cloak, leaving only a t-shirt. Using his ability, he causes the clothes to dissipate into the air. Lolia notes that this is an extremely convenient gift. She glances at his pants and says with a smile that she's going to have a hard time today. She notes that his giant can make even experienced women in brothels cry. The guy proudly confirms her words. She continues, adding that its width and length are the same as the wooden device she saw during the day. She asks if it has the same shape. The hero remembers and admits that it does. The girl freezes in surprise. She remembers how he said that the wooden object was made to order. Then she asks a direct question. Who actually ordered this device? The hero is embarrassed and looks away. The girl already clearly imagines the hero's pleasures among other men. She looks at him with surprise. And he, reading these thoughts in her eyes, hastily makes excuses that everything is not at all as she thought. The guy clarifies that he is only interested in women, and he is completely indifferent to men in this regard. The girl shrugged and said that she didn't care. At the same time, she added that even if the hero wanted to diversify his nightlife, he wouldn't be able to do so, because in this city, it's impossible to buy a man's services. The boy turns to her, about to say something, but the words get stuck in his throat. He freezes as his gaze stops at an unexpected sight. The heroine slowly removes another layer of clothing, lowers her eyes, peering into her own body. In the semi-darkness of the room, her figure looks surprisingly feminine, and the hero carefully examines every line. Their eyes meet. The guy smiles, anticipating a hot night. With a light movement, he throws her onto the bed. The girl screams in surprise and waves her hands away. She doesn't like it when he immediately seizes the initiative, but she remains lying there, waiting for his actions. The hero understands her expectations and begins to pull down her t-shirt, saying that he will show her with his body how much he likes chaste girls. The girl lies calmly, waiting for him to lean over her and start the fun. The guy drops down on the bed next to her and reminds her, as he said earlier, she must pay for the potion with her own body. He leans so low that he almost touches her face. Looking into the girl's bold eyes, the hero says, if he doesn't like the night with her, the deal will be cancelled. With his help, the last of her clothes fall off. Examining her body, he continues, if she thinks she can get away without trying, she must be prepared to fail. The boy adds that now the girl must prove her mettle. Hearing this, she breaks into a sly smile, full of desire. She gently touches his cheek, and as soon as the young man loses his vigilance, the heroine abruptly turns him over, forcing him to find himself on his back. The guy did not expect such a reception. She cheekily asks what will happen if she exhausts him to the core. She jokingly clarifies that maybe she will get all his potions then, if she does even better than he expects. The hero is silent, just staring at her body. He is glad that he has fallen into the hands of a resourceful girl who knows how to take everything under control even in such a situation. She warns him not to underestimate her abilities, and adds that now it's up to him to make the decision, not her. As she removes the last piece of clothing, she warns, her techniques are so good that even the director of the company where she worked before begged her to become his passion. The guy notices that he hasn't done anything yet, but she's already completely ready. It's the first time he's seen something like this, and he looks at her with distrust. But he recognizes it as an advantage. The girl leans towards him, showing her readiness to act. The hero exclaims in surprise, realizing that her boast was not unfounded. She really is capable of setting herself on fire so quickly. Carefully sitting on him, she screams with pleasure, trying to make the right impression on the hero to get the promised potion, and she succeeds. The girl begins to move, gradually increasing the pace and rhythm with each thrust. The guy feels her deeply embrace him and squeeze him with her whole body, demonstrating true mastery in the art of love. The young man comments on her movements, admitting how much he likes her. The heroine giggles and replies that the hero's giant turned out to be quite good. She looms over him and warns him that she won't hold back now. Even if he cries, she'll keep going. With a cloudy look in her eyes, she calls him brother, and he trembles with pleasure. A real confrontation of passion breaks out between them. Their screams reach the street. The guy squeezes her hips, helping to keep the rhythm, and his ragged breathing becomes hotter and hotter. The girl arched her back, trying to give him even more pleasure, and at the same time get pleasure for herself. The room became stuffy and hot. The air seemed to be scorching. The young man greedily explores her body, touching her in a way that makes her moan with pleasure. Their lips meet periodically, both of them sweaty and completely wet from the constant movement. He changes position, supporting Lola to make it easier for her. They merge in a hot kiss, and the hero notes how charming this girl is, who has completely surrendered to him. He feels warm and good inside her. The guy notices that she skillfully uses her rare ability, the art of carnal pleasures. The hero is happy that the night spent with her will remain in his memory forever. Mastery of bodily pleasures is a special skill that, thanks to magic, allows you to control your body and its most sensitive points, as well as even the ability to get pregnant or avoid it. The hero knows that mastering this skill is very difficult. You need to learn to control the body and magical energy, especially restorative magic. Therefore, it is extremely rare. At the same time, the young man understands. All this is just theory. In reality, the technique has many subtleties and nuances that cannot be mastered without many years of practice. The hero realizes that it doesn't end there. By concentrating magic on the most sensitive points, the girl is able to intensify the sensations so that their fusion with him becomes a double pleasure for both. The guy feels this ability especially acutely. Despite his experience in love, this is the first time he has experienced something like this in his life. Lola's level of knowledge and technique even scares him. The hero understands that she skillfully finds men's weaknesses in order to influence them. And she does it so masterfully that it takes his breath away. The girl, with her skills, gives him such feelings that they are amplified tenfold. The hero can only compare it with heavenly pleasure, cosmic delight. The guy reproaches himself for having previously considered her a simple gray mouse. He was wrong. There are almost no girls who possess such techniques. Lola laughs and says that he not only has a large size, but also a high level of lovemaking. This flatters the hero, and he tries his best to match her level. She raises her face to his and says it's time to teach him a lesson. Otherwise, he won't admit that she brought him to his peak. The girl announces that she is taking the initiative again. She flips him over so he's on his back again. He wasn't expecting such determination. She explains that guys who are too aggressive are often the most vulnerable. The girl says that this vulnerability is revealed especially when a man finds himself under a woman. And she begins to move actively again, carefully watching his facial expression. She slyly notices that he wants to reach the top and finish as soon as possible. Therefore, she demands that the hero not hold back and let out everything he has been accumulating for so long. She wants to remember this moment. Lola shouts loudly, insisting he hand over the child. The hero calms down, and she calls out once more, pleading for him not to cease and to see it through to the end. The heroine's loud and prolonged scream ends it all. The guy bends over and comes out of her, feeling an incredible sense of relief. The hero's girlfriend is breathing heavily and in short bursts. She looks at him and admits that if it weren't for her art of carnal pleasures, she would definitely be pregnant. The girl is struck by the amount of liquid on the bed. She blushes and smiles, saying that tomorrow he, like her, will not be able to stand on his feet. She praises him for his skill, recognizing him as her equal. The heroine adds that she has yet to meet any boys who can compete with her skills. The exhausted hero leans back on the pillows, exhausted but satisfied with the passionate girl. But within a moment he tells her not to thank him. Thanks to his auto-recovery ability, the guy instantly regains his strength and looks energetic again. She is stunned. The girl exclaims in surprise and cannot believe that after a short rest the hero is ready again. He approaches her with enthusiasm and invites her to a second round of the battle of love pleasures. She waves her hands, begging to be given a break. The guy asks where she is going. The hero smiles and says that if she thinks she can take over his entire potion collection in one night, she is deeply mistaken, so they should continue this game. The moon, which illuminated the small town all night, is replaced at dawn by a bright disk of the sun, which casts a blinding light over the rooftops. The road the heroes follow winds through forests and mountainous terrain. A majestic fortress city appears on the horizon. As they get closer, the travelers see a giant gate with a massive grill. After a sleepless night, Lola can barely stand on her feet, slowing down the group, while the main character is radiant with vigor and looks completely rested. The boy exclaims with relief that they have finally reached the city of Lotus. The Scarlet Witch notes in amazement that the city is teeming with adventurers like them. Lola is annoyed by his elevated tone. She sarcastically says that he talks about it too calmly, muttering that the hero is just a carrier. The guy sighs and replies that everything is not as it seems to her. He admits that it's strange to him that even the girls stay with him voluntarily. The young man hands Lola the potion, reminding her that they worked together yesterday. The heroine takes the vials and notes with a smile that yesterday he saw only a part of her possibilities. She narrows her eyes predatorily and advises him not to lose his vigilance. Meanwhile, Scarlet carefully examines the crowd around her. She notices many strong-looking adventurers, and understands that such a concentration of forces could play into their hands. Looking around, the girl thinks, "Here he is, the real Dungeon City." She realizes that she only has to prove herself and win in a strong team, and she can stay in it forever. She turns her attention to the hero and Lola, surprised at how quickly passion has arisen between them. The girl tries to understand whether this is the result of their joint fight against the monster or something else. She turns to Lunamiria and asks what is happening to their companions. But the nun remains silent, only looking sadly after her beloved Sayev, who is walking away with another girl on his arm. Scarlet understands everything without words. She looks at the hero with contempt, not understanding how he can be such a ladies' man. Meanwhile, the guy mumbles that adventurers are crowding around the registration window. He returns to his companions and suggests that they go eat first. With a smiling glance at Lunamiria, he asks her opinion. The nun happily agrees to this wonderful idea. The group heads to the nearest food court. Each of them has arrived in Lotus to take the rank-up exam, the only way to quickly rise in the Adventurers Association. Iron, bronze, silver, and gold are the ranks. The higher the rank, the greater the political influence. Those with gold status are treated with respect, like an aristocrat. Advancement depends on the benefit to the association, so adventurers descend into dungeons to defeat major bosses, or take on urgent tasks and earn achievements. It usually takes years for even an experienced traveler to rise in rank, and this is no surprise to anyone. Lotus City, located in the Lincoln Lands, is nicknamed the Bronze Rank Dungeon City. Its requirements are strict, and every adventurer here must abide by the established rules. One of the main tasks is to defeat the powerful magical creatures that inhabit these lands. Only after that can you claim the bronze rank, but beginners often take on the impossible. Each of the heroes who arrived in Lotus is a newcomer. The main character, like his friends, is firmly convinced. He will achieve bronze status and be able to live freely in this harsh world. They set out to take the rank-up exam, but first they need to register with the guild as new adventurers. They are met at the counter by an attractive receptionist with hair falling over her face. She smiles slyly and looks at the hero enviously, surprised that at such a young age he has already brought his own team. Ignoring her pins, the boy asks Runo to register Amelia and Zophie as adventurers. He points to the two acquaintances who are carefully inspecting the guild building, with a stunned Mao standing nearby. But registration is not his only goal. The guy also wants to find out important information, and is ready to pay for it. He demonstratively jingles a coin, showing the girl at the receptionist his wallet. He needs to find out where the herbs grow and the monsters are found, both in the city and in the labyrinth. The receptionist, looking at him with an appraising look, notes that he clearly has a tight wallet since he is willing to pay generously for such obvious things. Laughing, she says that all the basic information can be obtained for free. The data about the labyrinth in the archive costs only a silver coin, but since the boy cannot read, he will have to pay twice as much. But she also offers something else. For a fee, she is ready to tell you things that you can't find in books. It is not profitable for her to help without benefiting herself. She may also get scolded or even fired. Sai is interested and asks what exactly she has to offer. The girl explains that she has information about the weaknesses of the bosses and masters of the labyrinth. Her offer is advantageous, because the rest is based only on archives. The guy asks who exactly the masters of the labyrinth are, but the receptionist quickly realizes that he is completely ignorant. She suggests that he first register his two companions, and then go to a secret place where she will explain everything. The nun and the hired killer fill out the necessary papers. Under the watchful eye of Scarlet and the Observer, they enter all the data. All that remains is to submit the documents, go through the further procedure, and you can proudly wear the title of adventurer. The guild registrar then leads the boy through the narrow corridors of the building, through several courtyards, and eventually they enter a small room. In the center is a table with a map, and the walls are lined with shelves filled with books. The girl explains that this is an archive accessible only to the guild's adventurers. Ordinary people are forbidden from entering, and not every guild member is allowed to enter. According to her, the map on the table shows the locations of monsters, but you can't take it with you. It's only allowed to use it within the archives. Thanks to it, you can learn more and gain an advantage in knowledge. The registrar says that the Lotus Labyrinth is a single-story structure, but so huge that even in the guild, no one knows its true size. Research has been conducted, but even the approximate scale remains a mystery. Despite the absence of the sun underground, the sky there shines just as brightly as on the surface. It gets dark there at the same time as the sun sets outside, giving you time to prepare for the night. The only difference is the abundance of monsters and the extremely unfavorable conditions for survival. The guy wonders how dangerous it is to vacation in such a place. Then the girl shows circles on the map. These are safe zones where adventurers have sprinkled holy water for hundreds of years, which scares away monsters. Sai notices that the map is divided into 6 parts. The registrar confirms his guess and says that the old scroll shows the territories of 5 bosses and the maze master himself. While the young man leafs through books and scrolls, the girl explains. The bronze rank exam in Lotus has 2 stages. First, practice, a battle with the guild examiner to prove your skills. The second stage is the team challenge. You need to gather a group and defeat the maze master. But first, you will have to defeat the bosses of each area. The guy is flipping through old documents. Most of them look ordinary, but suddenly one entry catches his attention. Looking closely, his eyes widen in surprise. The documents state that the boss levels range from 26 to 31, while the labyrinth master is level 38. The hero thinks that these are 2 strong opponents for the bronze exam. The girl hadn't said this before, but upon hearing the guy's conclusion, she crossed her arms over her chest and squinted. He had managed to notice the most important thing. She adds that the mortality rate in the Lotus Labyrinth is very high, especially in recent months. In addition to bosses, other strong monsters or even whole packs of them appear there. Many lose strength without reaching the goal. According to the registrar, the heroes will need a lot of luck to avoid exhaustion before the battle with the bosses. But you can't rely on fortune alone. You need skills and long-term training. She explains that if the team manages to defeat the main monster, it won't respawn for about 10 days. You can follow the changes on the guild bulletin board. Rereading the documents, the boy realizes that in recent months no one has been able to defeat the bosses or the master. Someone died. Someone surrendered. And some simply got scared and refused to go any further. The reason is obvious. The more deaths there are in the labyrinth, the stronger the monsters become. They level up thanks to the blood of adventurers, and this vicious circle will not be broken as long as victims continue to fall. The mass death is attributed to several factors. Unexpected mutations in the maze, newcomers who underestimated the danger, and chaos caused by false information. The boy is pulled out of his thoughts by the girl's voice. She advises him to leave this place and go to another city, where it will be easier to raise his rank, although it will take longer. But he refuses. He is too interested in everything he hears. Looking at the bulletin board, the young man repeats with new stubbornness. He will get the bronze rank at any cost. The high level of difficulty will not stop him. The girl doesn't answer, just smiles mysteriously, no longer trying to convince him. After reviewing the received materials once again and finding nothing new for himself and the team, the guy prepares to return to his girls. After a while, he finds himself back in the guild hall, looking down the stairs at the crowd. Some are waiting for their comrades, others are hurrying about business. And then he notices familiar girls nearby. Runamilia and Zophie proudly display the wooden adventurer symbols they received, hanging on their chests like pendants. The nun looks at them with admiration, happy that they are now officially in the guild. The boy claps his hands, congratulating his friends on this achievement, because now they are recognized as real adventurers. But Scarlet, standing behind, does not share this delight and looks much more reserved. As she gets closer, the young witch hears talk about the need to register the team, as now everyone is gathered and has become official newcomers. The nun is genuinely happy about this news. Scarlet asks if there are any ideas for a name for the new group. The younger one's eyes immediately light up. It seems they've been waiting for this moment their whole lives, ready to shower them with suggestions one after another. The killer is just starting to share his thoughts, but the nun interrupts her, suggesting they call the team Servants of God. Sophie dismisses the idea as stupid, while Scarlet looks on reproachfully. The guy just sighs, calling them typical rookies. Runamilia is interested in the witch's opinion because the name Servants of God really sounds strange. Zophia's suggestion of girls also doesn't fit because there's a boy on the team. Scarlet rolls her eyes, saying she doesn't care. The girls don't back down and start hugging the witch, begging her to give them advice again. But Scarlet turns her gaze to the boy and asks him, as the leader. He, without hesitation, gives a simple name: the Carriers. The girls explode with indignation, believing that this is even worse than the previous options. The guy just suggests solving everything with a game of rock, paper, scissors. The winner will choose the final name. In the end, it is announced that the name The Bearers has won. One of the stern guards at the entrance to the arena, reading a wooden plaque, solemnly announces the new team. Despite protests, this decision is entrenched. After that, the guard announces that the first part of the exam will take place here, in the arena. He orders them to bring their own weapons and armor, as the guild does not give anything out, and allows the team to proceed. A circular arena opens up before them. Spectators sit on the steps' benches, frozen in anticipation of the spectacle. Majestic marble columns in the Etresque style emphasize the solemnity of the place. The crowd in the stands closely watches the girls as they enter the arena. Some stare intently, while others indifferently enjoy themselves with their friends, not paying any attention to the newcomers. Scarlet curiously asks the security guard who all these people are and what they are doing here. The man calmly explains. They are spectators who have come to watch the exam being taken, because they have free time now. Looking around, Sai notices that some of the audience is betting on the results. They are carefully studying the strengths of each participant, trying to guess who will overcome the challenge and who will fail. Nearby he sees a table where people are crowding, leaving money on a special tray and discussing favorites. The shine of gold coins indicates the seriousness of the excitement. The guy mentally admits that he didn't mean to start off so loudly, but if people just want to watch, there's nothing wrong with that. Shrugging, he continues on his way after the guard. A loud exclamation from the guard breaks him out of his thoughts. He turns to the examiner and announces that he has brought new candidates for the test. A short, fat man sits on a bench nearby, humming softly to himself and greedily finishing the first plate of food. Several clean, empty bowls are already placed nearby. With his arms at his sides, the boy decides that the fat man is the examiner, but later realizes that he is only an escort, and he has mistakenly jumped to a conclusion. When the old man turns around, the young man sees before him not a small, mustachioed uncle, but a stocky warrior, capable of withstanding blows, although he doubts his own assessment. Grabbing the hilt of the sword with his palm, the man calls out his name and declares that he will test the newcomers in their first practical test. He explains that everything is allowed: techniques, magic, any skills. The main thing is to show strength. The old man calls for battle and waits for the first volunteer, nodding in defiance. Resolute Runamilia steps forward, clenches her fists, and declares that she is ready to be the first to pass the test. In her eyes burns the fire of determination that conquers fear. Examining the girl, the examiner asks if she has the status of a saint. Hearing the affirmative answer, he laughs in surprise because this is a rarity among young girls. He clarifies the level and presence of the holy arrow skill. Runamilia replies that she is level 20 and also possesses light, but can only use it on herself. The young man does not understand anything. The examiner says she can do it, but forbids holy energy. You can try as many times as you want. Runamilia, nervous, looks back at her friend, looking for support. Taking out the bat hidden by her outfit, the girl stands in a fighting stance, clutches the weapon with both hands, and announces her readiness for the exam. The young man looks down and thinks that everything will be fine. The girl has enough strength and faith to overcome any challenge. He recalls the fight with the giant centipede, when Runamilia felled the monster with one blow, and his confidence in her grows. However, she didn't use all her power then. And now the bat is glowing, energy is running through it, filling it with unprecedented power. A storm is brewing around the girl. Lightning bolts weave through the air. The wind howls. Magical power trembles in the air, preparing to burst forth. The young man sits aside, watching intently. He wonders if the old man will survive such a blow, because Runamilia's strength is staggering. The wind ruffles the examiner's hair, but he stands still. He admits with a smile that he hasn't seen such powerful magic in a long time. He mockingly incites the holy girl to strike him if she can. This only increases her determination, and she rushes forward. There is an explosion. The arena erupts in clouds of dust and debris. The audience gasps as the figures of the nunca and the old man disappear into the chaos. The girl grips the handle even tighter, swings and puts all her strength into the blow, aiming directly at the examiner. But the man remains calm, without a shadow of fear on his face. His confidence is evidence of true skill. The young man watches, torn with anxiety. Now he worries not for Runamilia, but for the frail old man, whom such a blow could crush. But he suddenly dodges with an impassive expression. The force of the blow passes him by, and the bat hits the void. Whirlwinds and dust rise around, but the examiner stands firm, one hand on his sword and the other behind his back, clenched into a fist. The girls and the young man almost fly away from the force of the storm. They are shocked, unable to utter words, because no one expected such a spectacle. Closing his eyes and smiling slyly, the man says that it is more like a breeze than a storm, because the blow did not reach the target. His mockery only irritates his opponent. Offended, Runamilia screams and throws random blows, but none of them touch the old man. He easily dodges each blow. The boy watches carefully, analyzing the fight. He understands that the old man sees all the moves through, because the nunchaku's blows are too predictable. With a deafening scream, the girl raises her weapon above her head, trying to deliver a blow that cannot be avoided. A blast of wind and dust covers the arena. Even the spectators in the front rows cover their faces with their hands. Escaping from the stones and dust, Sophie and Scarlet watch in horror as their fragile friend unleashes her hidden power. Their own faces and hair are distorted by the raging wind. The spectators in the front rows scream in horror and amazement. They ask each other what kind of power this is, because no one has ever seen such a spectacle. Only he, sitting all this time on a chair and carefully analyzing the fighting style, squints his eyes, peering into the cloud of dust, and guesses that the examiner managed to dodge even this devastating blow. When the curtain of dust finally clears, the silhouettes of the old and young nuns become visible. There is the clang of a blade drawn from its scabbard, and the cold steel rests on Runamilia's vulnerable neck. Another moment and the girl's life could have ended. Maintaining a calm composure, the examiner praises the girl, saying that this is enough. Runamilia holds the club motionlessly in her hands, staring at the ground shattered by her blow, and at the cracks in the stone that have not moved a hair on the old man's head. Surprise is now visible not only on the nun's face, but also in Sai's eyes. It seemed that such a powerful blow should have struck anyone, and yet it did not penetrate the examiner's defenses. Sophie and Scarlet's eyes widen even more, realizing the complexity of this test. Panting, the nun lowers her head, trying to raise her weapon again. She refuses to back down, even though sweat is dripping from her forehead and her breathing is ragged. The old man asks sympathetically if she can still move, as she looks completely exhausted. Raising her hands, trembling from fatigue, the girl attempts to strike, but at the same moment the examiner lightly touches the back of her head with his blade. From this tangential blow, Runamilia sharply bends and almost loses consciousness. Clucking her tongue and raising her eyebrows, the man asks if she has any experience in real combat. A trembling voice replies that this is only her second use of the weapon, and that before she had relied only on holy magic to navigate the labyrinth. Stunned by what he heard, the bearer realizes that the battle with the giant centipede was the girl's first real fight. He had no idea at the time because her movements were confident and without a single drop of fear. Returning the sword to its belt, the old man prepares to pronounce his sentence. Although the nun has sufficient abilities, her lack of experience does not allow her to be fully evaluated. Despite the strength she has shown, this time she has failed the test. The old man solemnly announces that Runamilia has failed the test. She will be able to try again only after she has gained experience in dungeons and small battles. The hall falls silent, his words echoing. Gritting her teeth, Scarlet clenches her hands into fists and barely restrains the urge to hit the examiner, mentally pouring out insults. Sophie remains silent, only carefully assessing the scale of the tests that lie ahead, and does not hide the seriousness in her gaze. Shaking the dust off her clothes, the examiner turns to the nun once more, advising her to return when she is more experienced and 100% confident in her abilities. The girl can only sigh heavily and agree. The young man concludes for himself. Abilities are worthless if they cannot be demonstrated in real combat. Rising from his chair and leaning his hand on its back, he warmly praises Runamilia, assuring her that she fought with dignity. But instead of gratitude, the nun cried, believing that she looked pathetic in front of everyone and herself in particular. But he, smiling, replies that this is not true, because she was incredible, and now it is worth working even harder and trying again. As the girl sits down to rest on the chair from which the bearer has just risen, pride shines in his eyes. He understands that despite his lack of experience, Runamilia's strength is immense. Over time, after battles in the dungeons, she will become a formidable ally. Meanwhile, the arena begins a break for restoration work. The stone slabs have been almost completely destroyed. Beavers in helmets enter the hall and, under the supervision of the senior master, carry heavy blocks one by one, preparing the area for a new battle. When the repairs are complete, the young assassin Zofia enters the arena, proudly announcing that it is her turn. The examiner stands in the center and calmly asks to show what this brave girl, who has dared to step forward, is capable of. Without saying a word, Zophie stares intently at the old man, and slowly begins to dissolve into thin air. The examiner raises his eyebrows in surprise, but for now remains unmoved, carefully observing the events. The girl's silhouette becomes barely visible, and then disappears completely from the field of view of both the audience and the old man, who stands with his hand behind his back clenched into a fist. He clicks his tongue and quietly says, "Well, that's interesting." Sai, Runamilia, and Scarlet watch in amazement as their friend suddenly disappears, unable to understand how it could have happened. The nun finds this technique incredible, as she has never seen anything like it. Scarlet explains that it is a special ability to conceal one's presence. Then the examiner realizes that he is dealing with a real assassin, and immediately understands the peculiarity of her technique. For anyone else it would be too late, but not for an old man with his experience. Sophie appears just in the man's shadow, her dagger gripped tightly. She creeps closer, preparing to strike stealthily to the side or stomach, leaning forward, putting her strength into the swing. But the old man had long seen through her plan. Drawing his sword, he knocked the dagger out of Sophie's hands with one precise movement and almost knocked her off her feet, noting that her tricks didn't work in the open arena. The assassin rolls her eyes in displeasure, acknowledging her failed attempt. Meanwhile, the old man picks up the dagger flying in the air and begins to examine it closely, squinting to study the blade and hilt from all sides. Turning his head to the girl, he says that Sophia could use throwing techniques. But in response, she bitterly explains that after she left the squad, her former comrades took all her throwing equipment, leaving her with only this single dagger. With a sigh, the old man returns the weapon to the girl and informs her that this time she has failed the test. He advises her to get a better arsenal next time, and combine long-range attacks with close combat. Unfortunately, this is another defeat that, no matter how much they want to admit it, they have to admit it. The bearer, the nun, and the witch realize with surprise and annoyance that perhaps none of them will be able to go any further. But Scarlet Andronard doesn't think of giving up. She gathers her strength, because nothing is decided yet. The best student of the Royal School of Magic is not used to defeats and doubts about her own abilities. Holding her wand tightly, the girl takes a few steps forward, declaring that it is her turn. Her gaze is filled with determination, her dress fluttering in the wind, her sleeves rolled up. She clearly has a plan of her own. The old man asks her to demonstrate her abilities while she slowly walks in circles, studying the arena and choosing a favorable position. His words irritate Scarlet, and she sharply asks him not to tell her what to do. Having found the right place, the witch turns to the examiner and warns him not to scold her if she gets hurt. She is confident in her superiority, and that she will show a much better result than the others. The crystal at the top of the staff flashes with a bright glow. Blinding rays spread around, illuminating the entire arena. The girl raises the weapon even higher, whispering a spell. At this moment, Zofia and Runamilia look at her in amazement, just as Scarlet herself once looked at them. A sudden gust of wind bends them against the benches in the stands. Holding her wand up high and gripping it tightly with both hands, the witch concentrates. Powerful winds and shining streams swirl around the crystal, but she stands still, ready to attack. The spectators watch intently as the fire and wind cover the arena. They don't even close their eyes or scream. Unlike during the nun's battle, they are absorbed in the spectacle of the action. The examiner stands calmly, noting only how skillfully the girl controls magic. Not everyone is capable of this, and it is truly impressive. A huge ball of fire rises above the arena, dissipating the heat around. Not responding to this praise because she doesn't need it, Scarlet exhales confidently and completes the spell. The huge ball burns under her control. She puts all her strength into it, concentrating the energy in one place. Having guided the ball through the wand, the young witch raises it even higher and looks at the old man. It seems that the magical clot is about to break, but thanks to her power, it completely obeys. Strengthening her creation, she adds smaller fiery clumps around it, resembling meteorites. She directs them towards the calm old man, who doesn't even move, just waits for the right moment. Following the small fireballs, a huge sphere created earlier flies. The witch controls it with her wand, and now it rushes at the old man, heating the air. The examiner comes face to face with the Academy's most powerful magic. Small balls on the sides leave fiery trails, and in the center a huge sphere blinds and burns with its heat. The audience is shocked and sympathizes with the old man, realizing that this time it is impossible to dodge. The men shout that the girl is not holding back, and the friends note with horror the madness of this bullet. Scarlet's eyes burn with boundless confidence. She is convinced of her superiority. Exclaiming loudly that the man has nowhere else to run, she watches without pity as the spells chase him. The old man doesn't answer, just mumbles softly, clicks his scabbard and draws his sword. His sharp swing cuts through the air with incredible speed, meeting the onslaught of flames. A moment later, he deflects one of the projectiles with his sword, takes a step forward, while a giant bullet hits the ground behind him, raising clouds of smoke and scattering sparks across the arena. He calmly notes to himself that wooden training swords are powerless against such force. They break immediately, injuring the owner unless they are strengthened with special techniques. The secret is to imbue the blade with magic and touch the bullet with it for just a moment. This is enough to set the direction and deflect the fiery projectile to the chosen point, avoiding damage. The man deflects all the bullets that fly at him, touching each one with his sword and deflecting the blows in the other direction so that none hit him or the spectators in the stands. The crowd erupts in cheers, unable to believe what they are seeing. Someone shouts indignantly that the old man is cutting through bullets faster than anyone can keep track with their eyes. It seems impossible. Suddenly, the spectator notices a huge ball hurtling straight down from above and shouts a warning. The man then stabs his sword into a stone slab, lifts it, and touches the ball with it, deflecting its blow. The plate rises with the sword, holding a giant fireball. The man could not redirect it further, lest anyone present in the hall be harmed by this force. With a cry of surprise, Scarlet watches as the bullet explodes high in the sky, leaving behind black smoke and a slab of stone. For her, this means defeat, as the old man remains unharmed. As the smoke clears, a man approaches Scarlet and praises her for her incredible strength. For such a young sorceress, her combat skills, strategy, and bravery are impressive, all aspects of extraordinary height. Finally, he announces that the girl has passed the test and is the first to overcome the task. Scarlet freezes in mute amazement, gripping her weapon tighter. Coming to her senses, she calls the old man an abnormal lunatic, and the crowd erupts in applause, congratulating Scarlet on her victory and passing the test. Zophie and Runa sincerely congratulate her on her success. The nun says that she expected nothing less from the academy's best student. The old man just brushes it off, muttering about the excessive fuss over a routine test. Now it's Sai's turn, the last contender of the day. He feels awkward under the gaze of everyone present, but tries to push aside unnecessary thoughts as he enters the arena. The examiner prepares to check, but notices the baggage handler badge on the boy's chest. This makes him smile, and at the same time it becomes known to all the spectators in the stands. The crowd bursts into laughter, dismissively calling the boy a weakling and joking that such a burden is not even suitable for bronze rank. To them, this is a senseless and ridiculous prank. Only his comrades remain serious. The assassin and the sorceress look at the stands with contempt, while Runa Amelia looks at them with tender admiration, her hands folded in prayer. She sincerely believes in his victory. Sai ironically asks if the old man is so surprised that the baggage porter is aiming for a bronze rank, but the examiner shakes his head and says that the boy himself is mistaken. He is surprised not by Sai's desire to gain rank, but by the fact that such a man worked as a porter at all. The guy just straightens his gloves, remains silent, and prepares for the decisive duel. Laughter rolls through the stands. If not long ago the audience was horrified by the girl's strength and recognized their power, now the simple medium only arouses ridicule and suspicions that this is a senseless performance. The old fat man repeats that he is surprised how Sai could be the carrier. He says this with good reason, because although he does not have the ability to evaluate, he has something more valuable: the hardened instinct of a veteran. Adjusting his glasses on the tip of his nose, the man notes that experienced warriors learn to keenly sense the enemy's strength. Sai silently watches him, preparing himself for a duel. The young man draws his sword, holding the scabbard in one hand and the hilt in the other, and says that he will accept the examiner's final verdict only after the fight. Laughter once again fills the arena. The most skilled mock him, saying that his swordplay is nothing but contempt. Everyone is convinced that in 3 seconds he will be on the ground. Clutching the handle, the boy holds back his emotions and doesn't react to insults. They mock him for going crazy, but Sai vows to prove otherwise by wiping the smiles off their faces. Despite the mockery, he fills his sword with magic, concentrating the power in his hands. The blade shines with a bright light. A trail of fire rises along the blade. The examiner looks more closely. Usually, wielders are not distinguished by their mana control, but Sai is different. His precise and economical use of amplification magic makes a strong impression. The boy smiles ominously and asks rhetorically if this will be enough to pass the test. The old man only smiles back. One of the guards throws a new sword to the examiner, as the previous one broke in the fight with Scarlet. The old man grabs it and, standing in a stance, prepares to start the duel. He grips the hilt and says that while Sai's mana control and power-up are impressive, it's not enough to defeat real monsters. The battle will tell the truth. The boy and the old man cross swords. Sai takes a step forward. The examiner clenches his fist behind his back and declares that he is ready to see his strength. The fight begins. The crowd around the arena grows. New people come running and whisper, asking what's going on. Sai's friends watch hopefully to make sure the young man doesn't get disturbed by the noise. Gritting his teeth, the boy thinks that he can't reveal all his cards in front of the crowd. so he will have to fight discreetly. Barely moving his lips, he whispered, "Let's begin." Sai attacks head-on, the sword shining with a blinding light, but the examiner parries the blow and leaps aside, avoiding being reached. Gathering himself, the boy hits with such force that the old man almost loses his balance, but still blocks the next attack, avoiding the blow. Staring intently at his opponent, Sai takes a step back and lands a few more blows. The old man confidently parries them, standing firm as a rock. The boy's face becomes even more serious, reflecting his determination and willingness to go all the way. Leaning back after parrying, he slides his sword across the ground, kicking up sparks and dust, and stops on one knee. The guy stands up abruptly and looks into the arena, trying to come up with a clear plan of attack and understand which side is best to attack from, because a direct attack, as he has already seen, does not bring victory and does not give him any chance. Quickly flying towards the old man, he slashes with all his might at the right side of his torso, but the examiner calmly repels a series of blows, blocking each of them, not even looking at the persistent opponent. At that very moment, the old man tries to strike back, but the boy slides his knees along the ground and throws his head back, dodging a deadly blow that could easily sever his neck or head. Quickly gathering himself, he again assumes a fighting stance, this time raising the hilt of his sword closer to his face and striking sharply from the left side. But the old man anticipates his movement and calmly steps aside. The swords cross again. The clang of metal is heard, but now the examiner's blow is much stronger. Whereas before he had only dodged, now he himself goes on the offensive and counterattacks. His strength sends the boy flying even further, but the old man immediately rushes after him and swings again, and anger and determination flare up in the young man's eyes. He begins to get irritated by this game of blows. He wants to win at any cost. Slipping, the sword is knocked out of the boy's hands. He rushes headlong into another corner of the arena, while the examiner prepares for the next blow. The old man takes a step forward and breaks into a run again, but the young man manages to find his sword. Grabbing his weapon at the last moment, he parries the blow and even counterattacks. His sword flies up and with a powerful movement knocks down the examiner's blade, after which the boy abruptly throws himself at him in a swift onslaught. Swinging his sword left and right, the boy devises a new tactic, forcing the old man to lower his swings and shorten his blows. Choosing the moment, he sharply rushes forward, dust and lightning sparks rising under his feet. Flying towards the old man at breakneck speed, he gets behind him and tries to strike, but the examiner blocks the attack again. He admits that the boy hits hard, accurately and well, but his eyes betray his intentions even before the blow. These words make the young man even more furious. He kicks the old man in the face with all his anger, but the old man puts his hand up, escaping from a direct hit, and says dryly that for a young fighter this is also a good attempt. With his last strength, breathing heavily, the boy clutches the sword in his hand and wipes the sweat from his forehead. His gaze is fixed on the old man. He no longer knows from which side to attack, in order to at least touch him once and gain the coveted bronze rank. The old man slowly swings his sword and, without even straining, boldly says that he hasn't even broken a sweat yet. He advises the young man to cast aside all hesitation and strike with full force, because every time he deliberately opens himself, the boy has a moment of doubt. The examiner continues, explaining that this is a bad habit that must be eradicated. After all, the porter has something that others do not have, a hidden advantage, an ace up his sleeve, which he himself has not yet learned to use correctly. The boy attacks again, but while the old man is monologuing, he easily repels all the blows and comes to the conclusion that the young man's movements are too chaotic and meaningless. 7 times in a row, the examiner notices the young man shifting his center of gravity before the shot, which is completely unnecessary. This, in his opinion, is a sign that the boy is not confident in his actions, even though he tries to show the opposite. One strike is enough for the porter to fall to the ground again and lose coordination. Meanwhile, the old man continues to say what he sees. Sai has several plans of attack at once, and they all mix in chaos. The old man asks if he is judging correctly, but this is more of a rhetorical question, because the young man really imagines victory in his mind, sees himself delivering the decisive blow. But all these insults fly away in an instant when a new challenge breaks out of the examiner's mouth. The stands and the boy's companions are stunned. The spectators are surprised how this porter is still holding on and hasn't fallen, because it seems that the fight has been going on for an eternity. The girls notice that the examiner is becoming more and more serious. This fight is not at all like the previous ones. The old man notes that the boy wields the sword gracefully, which suggests to him that he was born into a noble or even knightly family. The young man's eyes widen in surprise, this assumption throwing him off balance. Clutching his sword with incredible strength, the old man carefully studies the young man. sliding his fingers along the silver blade, and notes that such exquisite decoration is characteristic only of the Amberius aristocracy. He is suspiciously surprised how a nobleman's weapon ended up in the hands of a commoner, and these words stir up painful memories in the young man, so he rushes forward to drown out the voice of the past. Intercepting the sword with his other hand, the boy makes a sharp lunge, full of anger, and for the first time manages to lightly touch the old man, cutting off a few strands of gray hair from his head. The stands explode with exclamations of surprise. Another moment and the blow would have been real. The girl with 2 ponytails shouts about the incredible speed, while the other one does not understand where the sword has disappeared from the young man's hand. In the hero's heart, not only the desire to obtain the bronze rank burns, but also a burning desire to win or even kill, so he prepares for a decisive event. But suddenly it all ends. The old man sheathes his sword, and with a smile congratulates the boy on his successful test, his stern face brightening with goodwill. The young man froze, not believing what he had heard, still clutching the blade in his hand, while the stands thundered with applause and joyful shouts, congratulating his victory. Slowly getting up, he shakes his head, and the old man explains that the boy's strength has exceeded all expectations, although the young man himself is convinced that his victory was allowed. In reality, the hero is mistaken, because behind the calm and indifferent mask of his mentor, a real storm raged. He barely kept himself from panicking during the battle. The elder assures that this experience will be invaluable in the future, and adds that he will not pry into other people's secrets so the young man can rest assured. To encourage the boy, he reveals his own truth. A weapon in itself is nothing. It is just a tool, and victory is not determined by it, but by the skill of the one who wields it. He says that by observing an opponent's breathing, movements, and posture, one can predict their actions and become an invincible warrior, even without extraordinary strength. He who grasps this simple truth will turn everything around into a weapon, and his power will surpass any boundaries and classes. It is to such warriors that the secrets of the world are revealed. So the title of simple bearer has no weight, because a completely different path opens up before the young man. He returns to his friends, who are bursting with joy for him. Runa Amelia enthusiastically praises him, saying that he has exceeded all her expectations, and warmly congratulates him on his triumphant battle and passing the exam. But the young man, frowning, mutters that the old man has been leading him by the nose all this time, and continues to thoughtfully go over in his mind every moment of the duel and the words he heard. Scarlet proudly proclaims her own success, having also passed the test, while Runa Amelia bows her head in dejection, remembering her own defeat. The hero encourages her, assuring her that the dungeon experience will help her earn not only bronze but more, and that he will always be there, watching her grow. The girl blushes at his passionate words, whispering that for her he is a true apostle, although the young man does not understand her words, and the friends only look at each other in surprise. Smiling softly, he says that there is nothing special about him, that he is just a simple porter, not a knight, and even less an angel descended from heaven. The nun ignores his words, giggles quietly, and folds her hands, assuring him that she understood everything and will simply pretend that she didn't notice anything, beaming with happiness that seems strange to the hero. To distract attention, the young man says that from now on, as equal adventurers, he has the right to call her simply Runamilia without formal titles, and the girl looks at him in confusion. Embarrassed, she waves her hands, fumbles for words, calls him an apostle, then corrects Say, insisting that he address her not dryly as Runamilia, but tenderly and briefly as Rune. Laughing contentedly, the boy promises to call her whatever she asks, and gently says, Rune, which finally finishes the nun off and plunges her into sweet delight. Finally, they reach the main lobby of the guild, where a crowd of people surrounds them on all sides. The assassin is irritated by the attention, but Scarlet, on the other hand, is beaming with joy. She laughs, praising her own feat as her brilliant performance on the exam now guarantees increased demand. Every team will want such a valuable and charming ally. But the crowd's curiosity isn't limited to Scarlet. Men surround Runamilia, casting candid glances at her breasts and commenting on their size, much to her embarrassment. Sophie was also surrounded. Men were looking at her fragile body and pale skin, showering her with words about her cute appearance, promising to teach her many useful things in their teams. The witch enjoys the attention the most. Men praise her figure, call her to join, promise her potions for fun, and assure her that they will even defeat dungeon bosses with her. But suddenly Sophie steps forward, declaring that time has passed and the hungry dogs should move away, keep their distance, and not greedily cling to the girls. The girls approach Say, hugging him. Even Sophie, despite secretly being happy at the attention, abandons her loyalty and says that they all belong to the porter, and that must be taken into account. Her words surprise both men and girls, and the hero himself, but he is not confused and confirms that he is ready to unite only with those teams that will not touch his wives. The crowd retreats. The squad leaders go about their business. The girls grumble in discontent, and Runamelia looks at her apostle with surprise and a red face, not understanding what he meant. But suddenly Scarlet grabs the guy by the throat, squeezes him so hard that his veins stand out, and demands an explanation, why he decided that she was his wife or would one day become one. Sei tries to calm her down, explaining that he only did it to scare the brat, and Sophie adds that those men only wanted to use the girls, not fight the monsters. A voice comes from the shadows, and a cute guy with short hair steps forward, asking if he's really the leader of the Porter team and suggesting they team up. The young man is not in a hurry to answer, puts his hand on his side and notes that the stranger immediately recognized him as a leader, although he thought he looked awkward in this role. But the boy convinces him that a porter is essential for dungeon expeditions. He says that he has been in the guild for 3 years and that his squad has gained a lot of experience during that time. After a brief introduction, Sei introduces himself as the leader of the carrier team, and the guy turns out to be the leader of the investigation team named Rock. They shake hands as a sign of respect. The hero wonders if Rock has already cleared the dungeon, as his team must have defeated several guards. He smiles and confirms, naming a leopard newt, a mystical goat, a fan-shaped eagle, and a giant sand crab among them. Without any modesty, Rock says that in 3 years they have defeated 4 dungeon guards, and now their target is a fire-breathing salamander. However, due to certain difficulties, the task has been temporarily halted. Runamelia finds it incredible that the group managed to kill 4 guards, as they are extremely powerful creatures. Scarlet purses her lips and asks about the last guard, clarifying if the only one left after him is the dungeon master himself. Rock explains that the Lotus labyrinth is huge, and the guards are constantly moving within their possessions. Even with intelligence, finding them is a huge feat, as the search can last for months. Therefore, it is not chance that is important, but intelligence and the right choice of weapons. They can be defeated, but Roka's squad lost many fighters during the fighting. Now they are gathering detailed information about the monsters and the cave itself to better prepare themselves and not repeat old mistakes. According to Sei, in this case, the role of the medium becomes even more important. Rock notes approvingly that the young man instantly grasps the essence. He goes on to say that their team always plans carefully and turns knowledge into combat power, reducing time spent on useless reconnaissance. They differ from other units in that they place the main emphasis on training. Rock does not hide his admiration for Sei's courage shown during the test. He believes that such potential is completely atypical for the bearer, and this makes the guy especially interesting. Sei sighs that even then no one believed in him, and all the bets were against him. Rock honestly admits that he also bet on his defeat. The guy is a little hurt by this, but he thanks him for his frankness. Putting aside the topic of betting, the young man concludes. Since he and his friends are beginners, joining forces with experienced ones is the best way out, and a chance to gain new knowledge. Smiling, Rock agrees and adds that he is always ready to answer any questions he or the team may have. Thus begins their collaboration. Night falls outside. After a busy day, Runamelia, Sei, Sophie, and Scarlet return home to rest and recharge. Sophie pulls her hair into a ponytail and, standing in a light nightgown through which her body shines, asks Sei if she can really trust her new acquaintances. The guy, lying on the bed with his hands behind his head, asks if this is about Rock's squad. In his opinion, cooperation with experienced people can only be beneficial. Sitting on the soft bed, the girl says that from now on their lives will depend on that team, so she asks him again if he is sure of his decision, because before they had always acted independently. Sei replies that compared to those crazy people in the guild, these people can be trusted more. The simpletons are easy to understand, but those who stand out too much are actually the most dangerous. The guy adds that the only real protection is the weapon in your own hands, because the deeper you go into the dungeon, the thicker the darkness of human hearts. In the meantime, it's worth enjoying the new experience, because tomorrow their first trip to the dungeon awaits them. Remembering another important point, Sei takes out 4 black throwing knives for Zofia, remembering how her weapons were taken away, leaving only a small dagger. Sitting between his legs, the girl examines the blades with admiration and admits that they are of exceptional quality. Sei explains that they were made by a blacksmith magician from black iron, making them unique weapons. After removing the target, the young man says that these knives are convenient in both close and long-range combat, and now she will be able to use them in any situation. Having set a target, he suggests they practice. Sophie happily agrees and, climbing closer to the ceiling, throws the knives one by one, hitting them squarely in the center. For her, only a perfect result is possible. All the knives hit the target squarely in the center. The force of the blow knocks her off the bed, lands on the floor, and spins around for a bit. But even in that position, the girl manages to throw a few more blades and also hits. The training continues, but now Sei himself becomes the target. He deflects the blows with a frying pan lying nearby and wraps a strong rope around his fist. When Sophie is distracted, the young man manages to throw a rope under her feet, and she falls onto the bed. However, the girl is not at all upset. Looking up, she says with a smile that he is indeed strong, as she expected. The guy just shakes his head, admitting that he still has a long way to go before he's someone she can trust. But Sophie immediately teases him, joking that he's still a weakling, and that these words will definitely backfire on her. Pulling the girl by the shoulders, Sei sits her between his legs, hugs her fragile breasts and begins to caress them, squeezing and stroking them, telling her that she can keep the front line of battle to herself. Skirmishes are replaced by sweet sighs. Choking from soft moans, Sophie still manages to ask in a trembling voice how much he paid for the new weapon. Her hair falls over her face, her sweaty body trembles, and beads of sweat roll down her chin. Smiling, Sei replies that even a young girl's body would be enough to compensate for everything. Sophie, jokingly calling him a pervert, laughs, and he doesn't even object. In a room lit only by moonlight, intimacy flares between them. They merge in a single burst of passion, sparing neither themselves nor time. The merging of bodies and souls continues all night. The young man does not stop, taking what is his, and the girl readily obeys, stretching out her arms so that he can grab them and make another powerful thrust. At this time, somewhere in the darkness, by the light of a lamp with a candle inside, Rock sits at a table and writes carefully with a pen on paper. His face is lit by a disturbing smile, and no one knows what it means. The next morning, when the sun has already risen, the heroes set off for the guild building. Atlantean knights with swords stand at the entrance. The facade is decorated with columns and jugs with flowers and bushes. The unknown awaits them ahead, but they take this step without fear.